Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 302, Makhachev versus Poirier. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me, as usual, is Keith Shillan, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. Keith, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. Big card. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Big card. I was out this past weekend because I was out of town, so I wasn't there live for the recap, but you had a capable stand-in, and it was kind of loose and different. And I just want the record to show that of the two of us, it's when I'm not here that strangely like things devolve into anarchy. Like it's
yeah. Bob Simpson.
It's great though.
The problem is his gimmick is up. Like he plays a troll, and now he can't do that anymore because he showed he's very knowledgeable. And
he was shockingly normal and nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's gonna have to come back. It's gonna be like the Masked Wrestler reboot where we're gonna pretend we don't know who he is when he comes into the chat with like a different name.
I like he came in and he was like, I asked him what he's going to go to college. What he wants to do. And he's like, I want to be a doctor. I'm like, I never would have guessed that the troll Bob Simpson, or Simpson, whatever his name is Simpson, is going to be be a doctor.
No,
but, hey.
I assumed that Bob Simpson was somebody between our ages who had been a fan for a good long time because you could tell he was knowledgeable and just was being a grouch for the fun of it. So that was a fun reveal. Even Bob Simpson would, I think, not have too much to complain about this card. UFC 302, we'll probably talk about it when we get to it. The whole, does Dustin Poirier deserve this title shot? I mean, deserve is a whole different can of worms when you're talking about UFC title shots. But even outside of that, speaking only for myself, I'm excited for this one, man. There's a grand total of one debuting fighter on the whole card, so it's not Dana White's Saturday Night Contender Series by any stretch, and just good fights up and down. There are a few people that are in kind of prove it mode that didn't look great their last time out, but there's a difference between I was on a 6-fight win streak and then I lost last time. Did I get exposed or was it just a speed bump? And I'm on a 4-fight losing streak and I'm definitely getting cut if I lose this time. Like there's just a different energy to it. Sure. What's your thought on this card?
So obviously it's a pay-per-view, so you got to grade it a little bit more, harsher. You're asking for, me to fork out money to watch this. So I give it like a C. Like you seem like a little higher on this card than I am. The main event, Dustin Poirier, he's earning a title shot on a 1-fight winning streak, beating an unranked opponent. Now, again, some people get a fast track. I mean, he's a legendary fighter. He's been an interim champion. He's headlined big pay-per-views, beef with Conor, and I don't have an issue with him getting a title shot. Sometimes it's the right place, right time. And other guys,
and if I may interject, part of it is there's a certain amount of perception, I think, even if we don't admit it, that man, Makhachev's going to steamroll whoever they put in front of him. So give Poirier one more chance.
Get it over with. Get it over with. And the other thing, the guys who are in the running put themselves in, they want to be part of UFC 300, knowing that's not the time frame that Makhachev was going to be. This was the card that Makhachev wanted to be on, and Poirier was the guy. They offered it to Arman Tsarukyan, and Tsarukyan turned it down. It's a really, you've just fought, you have a big turnaround, really quick turnaround against the pound for pound best fighter in the world. I understand. Gaethje wanted to, BMF it and fight in Holloway, and then Holloway, has a 5-round fight with Gaethje, and he's kind of the new guy back in lightweight. So sometimes just the guy who walks home with a pretty girl at the bar is the only guy in the bar. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
it's like that super hot chick who's like from a small town, and she gets like a guy that could not pull other girls in other town, but because he's like the cool guy in his town, because there's like 4 other guys, he gets a super hot pick.
That's not exactly how I would have phrased it, but I like the analogy. And yeah, Poirier, there's a certain amount of right place, right time. As you pointed out, there's a certain amount of he made these choices to be here. And there's a certain amount of, well, it's Dustin freaking Poirier. Yeah, give the man his cuts. I agree to a certain extent, because the UFC has gotten us used to top loading these pay-per-views with 2 title fights, and where we have one here that doesn't have maybe quite the suspense as some others, and then the co-main event, I mean, there's every possibility it's a title eliminator. Strickland isn't going to be far from the title picture until he loses 2 in a row at some point from here on out. So yeah, I agree with you that the top 2 fights kind of place a hard cap on it. But for me, the hard cap would be B. Like, no UFC pay-per-view with these 2 fights at the top is going to be better than a B, but I would give it a B. And okay, maybe I'll feel closer to a C by the time we're done talking about these 12 fights, or maybe you'll be more excited, because usually at the end of these things, you're more excited for the card. So that might be what happens.
Yeah, I've been out in the yard a lot today and outside in the sun. So it's just a very long week. So maybe that's why my brain's a little fried. So maybe that's why I'm being a little harsher. I just, like, some of the fights, like, don't make, like, we're just like Holland versus Olasic. Like, it's a good fight, but just like didn't see that coming. And like Romanov getting a big fight is just,
well, and he's stepping in on short notice, but yeah. Like, we did lose a banger of a fight. We lost the fight that I would have been most excited for anything outside of the top 2 fights, which was Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Hernandez. You know, I thought that was going to.
And Tyron Van was supposed to be on this one too. That was
Tyron Van was going to be great. They tried a couple different rearrangements to try to keep Van on the card. That fell through.
Give him a little bit of a pass.
Yeah. On the flip side, we lost Michelle Waterson Gomez versus Jillian Robertson, but just in honor of that fight, I'm going to preview it right now. So Waterson is going to come out and look like $1 million, just kind of piecing up Robertson, one of the few women in the division that's not going to be able to take her down. And she's going to be well on her way to winning a 30-27 decision and kind of redeeming herself from that miserable beating against Marina Rodriguez. And then out of nowhere, she's just going to shoot a takedown in the 3rd round and end up getting armbarred. Yeah. So there, I previewed that one for us. Any other general thoughts on this one before we dive in?
No, let's get into it.
First up at UFC 302 is a men's flyweight matchup between the debuting Mitch Raposo and Andre Lima. Raposo, the 25-year-old from Fall River, Mass. And since it's the first fight out of the gate at a pay-per-view, John Anik's Boston accent is going to get flexing right out of the gate. He's going to say wicked something. Yeah.
Yep. I used to live in Fall River.
And I just learned 2 weeks ago that Tisha Torres is originally from Fall River. So I had to go back and change my top 5 list of the all-time greatest fighters from Fall River, Massachusetts. I mean, it was Tom Lawler, number 1. Now I got Tisha Pennington up there. Okay. Achieved a little bit more. But anyway, Raposo, 9-1 overall. He fought on the Contender Series back in 2021, got tapped out in the 2nd round by Jake Hadley. Wasn't signed from there. So he just went back to New England, won a couple fights in CES, Combat Zone. He is the 3rd opponent they went digging for Andre Lima. Lima was supposed to fight Hyun-Sung Park on this card. Park withdrew. Then they called up Nyamjargal Tumendembarel, and Keith was very, very happy, I'm sure, that he fell out as well. So he gets to take a running start at that name, a few months down the road when that guy, dude, Mongolians, those are some tough ones. Yeah, anyway, Nyamjargal Tumendembarel fell off, and Mitch Raposo does get the call. And he'll look to show the UFC that they made the right choice against Lima. 25-year-old Brazilian, a perfect 8-0 as a professional. He's 1-0 in the UFC, made his debut just back in March at UFC on ESPN, Ribas versus Namajunas, where in one of the more memorable outings of the year so far, Igor da Silva got disqualified for biting him in the 2nd round. You remember the memes, you remember the tweets, you remember Dana giving the bite of the night bonus to Lima. he bought himself a certain amount of goodwill in a way that debuting flyweights out of the Contender Series don't generally get to do. And he'll look to keep the good vibes going here against Raposo. I'm not going to quiz you on many of these odds, Keith, because on a 12-fight card, there are only 3 fights on the whole card that are closer than a 2-1. This is not one of them. Lima's minus 205, Raposo plus 170. I'm going to flip this to you, Keith. You willingly or not are pretty well plugged into New England MMA, Southern New England in particular. Tell me what there is to like about Mitch Raposo, and tell me if you think he's just going to be a stepping stone for Lima here, or he could actually make a splash.
I don't. I think it's a great, great fight right out the gate. 2 flyweights. I like both guys. You know me, I'm very hard on New England fighters.
Yes.
People can say a lot of things about me, and a lot of times what they'll say about me negatively is true. But being a homer ain't one of them. Like I'm like the anti-homer. Raposo's one of the guys I like. Like he's
I have to preview an Alex Morono fight in about an hour here, right?
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Yeah. All right. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, he's got a tough test. Lima is a really solid prospect. A guy I've liked. He's only 25 years old, so he's not even close to a finished product. But what I've seen of him, he's a high output kickboxer who's very relaxed and comfortable in his striking. He does well to pressure and kind of cut off the escapes from his enemies, which shows so much maturity for a guy his age. He's accurate. I love his overhand right. He sits on his punches, which really draws some power. He's got a really good kicking game. I like that he checks leg kicks, which is rare. He wants people moving forward. He did struggle in his debut against Igor Savino when Savino was pushing him back and pressuring him before he decided to take a bite on him like he was friggin' Bo Nickal making a steak. He was actually helping Savino too because he was backing straight towards the cage. He can wrestle. He's got pretty good control, good ground and pound. He is a BJJ brown belt, but strong takedown defense. What I've seen, the only thing about him for a guy who's a BJJ brown belt, he has no submission wins. Raposo, it's hard to gauge what you have him because he's good. When you watch him, you're like, man, this kid's got a lot of talent. I go back to when he was on the Ultimate Fighter show. I think he was like the first pick in the show. So the coaches saw some talent in him. I don't remember which team picked him, but I remember him being the first pick, and I was surprised by that. That was years ago. Obviously he's matured. The problem is he looks fantastic, but he's done against guys with decent records and stuff, but not guys I like. Not guys I'm like Justin Valentine was his last one. Guy Matt Bassett disciple, a guy that's been around for a long time. He's good, but he's a regional guy. That's his upside. So it's really tough to kind of gauge what you have Raposo. What he does good, he constantly switching stances. He's constantly moving and changing angles. He uses feints really well to set up his shots. He's got fast hands, even for a flyweight. Very tight, clean boxing, accurate, beautiful jab. He attacks with combos. He hits hard. I mean, you look at the guy. The guy's really, for flyweight. He's got some big muscles for his, obviously for a 125 pounder, but he has stinging power. He fights behind a high guard defense. He's a very, hands up, slipping and ripping counter striker. One of his favorite ones, he'll slip and then counter with an overhand right. He works the body. I mean, his last one against Valentine, he dropped him with a body shot late in a fight that was such a slacking before that. He will occasionally wrestle, but the guy's from Massachusetts, so he's from Fall River, Duffy High School, I'm assuming. He's not I wouldn't call him a wrestler. He has solid takedown defense, though. He's got 3 subs on his record, and he's got good cardio. I've never seen him tire out, and he presses a high pace. This might be my favorite fight on the entire card. It's flyweights, which is always saying it's a good way to start the night. Not a far drive for Raposo, going to New Jersey, not like he's traveling across the country. I think this line should be much closer. What'd you say? You said Lima was over 2-1?
Yeah. 9 out of the 12 fights on this card are over 2-1. This one is minus 205 plus 170. So yeah.
I think this should be closer to pick 'em. I mean, I know Raposo's taking the fight on really short notice, so take that for what it's worth, and that might be why it's bigger. I like both guys. I think both guys are well-rounded. I think both guys have a lot of tools. I know you're backing your hometown guy later. I'm going to back my hometown guy. I'm going to take the upset right out the box. Like, I like Raposo's body work. I think he's got good output. He's accurate. And I think that's and I like Lima a lot, which is really surprising that I was going Raposo this. But the more I was digging into Raposo's, I like this. He's made big improvements since when he was cut. I know he wasn't in the UFC, but like his days in tough. Give me Raposo by split decision.
Yeah, I like the breakdown there, and I remember thinking when Raposo was on the Contender Series, because by that point, we were already previewing UFC cards, so I'm sure we talked about him at least in passing, but you were no longer doing every week previews of the Contender Series. Yeah. But I remember watching that episode and thinking Raposo looked good. And that's probably why I remember it, because maybe I asked you about it on our next preview. Like, who's this Raposo kid? He's like 22 years old. He looked pretty damn good. Here's the thing. He was winning against Hadley until Hadley took him down, just was faster in transition on the ground, ended up tapping him out.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was nothing in that fight that indicated to me that Raposo was not and would never be UFC material. You occasionally get guys come through the Contender Series like that. So I'm glad that, he went back to Boston, won 4 more fights, and now he's getting the call up. I don't think I'm as high on Lima as you. Like, I think both these guys are probably UFC material. And it's not like I'm down on Lima. I think it's just more of a wait and see type approach with him. It is worth noting that even before Igor Severino bit him, like Lima was clearly getting the better of that fight. I agree that the line should be closer. I think it's entirely possible that Raposo has a greater upside than Lima. I wouldn't be shocked at all if both these guys were still in the UFC 2 years from now, but Raposo was the one that was on a longer win streak or closer to the outskirts of the rankings. I just do wonder if the short notice nature of this, whatever kind of weight cut he has, is gonna keep him from showing out to his greatest potential. So I am gonna chicken out here and say that Lima wins the decision, and I bet it's gonna be a fight that's a whole hell of a lot of fun. We're probably gonna see like some high output striking as well as some pretty frantic groundwork. Nothing quite as memorable as Lima's last UFC appearance, hopefully, but give me Lima by decision. Next up on the UFC 302 undercard is a women's bantamweight matchup between Ailin Perez and Joselyne Edwards. Perez, the 29-year-old Argentinian, is 9-2 overall. She's 2-1 since joining the UFC just a little under 2 years ago. After losing her debut to Stephanie Egger, she's rattled off back-to-back decision wins over Ashley Evans-Smith and Lucia Pudilova. The most recent of those, the Pudilova fight, was back in November at UFC Fight Night Allen versus Craig. She will look to stretch it to 3 in a row at the expense of Edwards. 28-year-old Panamanian is 13-5 overall. She's 4-3 in the UFC. She is coming off a loss. She dropped a unanimous decision to Nora Cornell at UFC Fight Night Gall versus Spivak. That was UFC Paris last September. Prior to that, she had been on a 3-fight win streak, all by decision. So she'll be looking to get back in the win column here. She is not favored to do so. Perez is minus 200, Edwards plus 170. I was a little surprised that the line is as wide as it is here. I mean, I'm not high on either of these women in particular. I've very famously kind of bagged on Ailin Perez ahead of her UFC debut. She's already gone on to accomplish more in the UFC than I expected her to. I figured she'd be, if you'd asked me, especially after she lost her debut to Stephanie Egger, I would have said Perez isn't even going to make it to the end of her 4-fight deal. She'll be 2 and gone or 3 and gone. So she's already accomplished a lot more in the UFC than I would have expected her to. And Edwards, I've been kind of up and down in my take on Edwards. I just, keep going back to, she's got physical tools. She's got certain skills that, if not elite, are at least on a well above average level for women's bantamweights. And she's only 26. She's only 27. She's only 28. I've bounced back and forth between that and, well, she may still be in her mid to late 20s, but she seems to be kind of hardening into the fighter she's going to be from here on out. I mean, first thing that I think of when I think of Edwards is she's a good kickboxer who fights at her best. She fights longer than the tail of the tape says. She's got a good kicking game, hard kicks that she throws pretty willingly, despite the fact that takedown defense is one of her biggest Achilles heels. And she blends them nicely with her punches. She has, I think she has decent footwork on the feet. I mean, really, thus far, her only real prayer of stopping takedowns has been not to be there. Once another woman kind of gets into her space, it's kind of over. I don't think that's a good recipe for victory against Perez. I feel like I've said this about a few fighters, but especially recently, but there's two different things. There's what a fighter knows how to do, their skills, and then there's what they actually do in the cage. Once, everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
Ailin Perez wants to strike. Once she gets punched in the mouth, she wants to run across the cage, haul you down and either just beat you up or beat you up until you turn your back and then try to tap you out. That's Ailin Perez's thing. It was her thing all the way when she was fighting back on foam rubber preschool mats in, Southern Brazil. It's been that way in her UFC fights, win or lose. But I think that's going to work against Edwards, because Edwards is a good striker, but she's a good striker who's pretty reliant on kicks. And while she has good crisp power, she doesn't really have put you to sleep with one shot power. So I think they're going to kickbox pretty quickly. Perez is going to start getting things she doesn't like. She's going to barrel forward. She's going to take Edwards down. And that round, if not the fight, is going to be over. Edwards is tough, and while she's still easy to get down, she's gotten better at not just lying flat on her back and kind of working to get back up, inching towards the cage, wall walking, stuff like that. So I could see her surviving to the second round, maybe surviving to the third, and just losing a decision where Perez racks up 9 minutes of top time. But I'm going to go semi-bold here and say Perez finishes this thing in the first round. Give me 90 seconds of fun kickboxing, followed by 90 seconds of pretty one-sided groundwork, and Perez either getting a ground and pound TKO or a submission. But for the sake of the pick, I'm going to say it's a TKO ground and pound.
Yeah. I'm not very high on either one. This is definitely a lower level fight. This fight should be before Raposo versus Lima. Edwards seems like someone I feel like we've previewed so many times. She's massive for the weight class, obviously, long and lengthy. She's a kickboxer, good output. She's a pretty fast hands. They come from her hips, so they kind of hard to see. She can load up on a lot of her strikes. She has decent pop. She's got a good kicking game, kicks to the body. She likes those John Jones oblique kicks. She makes the mistake of throwing a lot of naked leg kicks, and she avoids shots by pulling her head straight back. I was surprised that she was hurt to the body against Ramona Pascal. That was really bad luck. Her best avenue of victory might be the plum clinch. She does a lot of good work in there. Knees, elbows, kind of using her height. She will occasionally look for a takedown, but she's definitely not a wrestler. Though she kept looking for the same headlock against Nora Cornelli, or how you say? I don't know. She's a terrible
Nora Cornhole. Named after the fun front yard lawn game.
Yeah.
Probably both going to play on Memorial Day. Yeah,
happy Memorial Day. Terrible takedown defense. She struggles to get back to her feet, and she makes the mistakes to look for subs off her back, which she just doesn't get. But I shouldn't say that. She has 3 subs on her record. So Perez, I like your breakdown of her. I mean, she's a pressure fighter, constantly moving forward. I'd say her hands are fairly fast because I think she's an okay athlete. She attacks with combinations. She'll throw some spinning attacks, which I'm not a fan of. She's not a bad wrestler, as you mentioned. She's got good entries. She will shoot without a setup, but she's very physically strong. She can get a lib and throw you. I mean, she took down Stephanie Egger. She made Ashley Evans Smith into a takedown dummy. Again, that's not a win that really aged well. On top, she's got good control. She advances position well on the bottom. Mean ground and pound. Though, just because she gets a fight to the ground, it's not over. I mean, she was subbed by Stephanie Egger. And her cardio, she gassed really bad in her fight against Lucy Pudilova. I think Edwards has improved a lot since she's came to the UFC because she was god awful when she first came in. She was as bad as they come. I'm with you though. I just expect Perez to out wrestle her for nonstop in this fight. I expect Edwards to spend the majority of the fight on her back. I'll say that she makes it to a decision, but Perez gets the victory.
Next up on the UFC 302 prelims is the first of 3 welterweight matchups in a row. This one featuring Mickey Gall versus Bassil Hafez. Gall, the 32-year-old New Jersey native, is 7-5 overall. He is 6-5 in the UFC. He is on a 2-fight losing streak, the first losing streak of any kind of his career, dropping back-to-back fights to Alex Morono and Mike Malott. Most recent of those, the Malott fight, was just a bit over 2 years ago at UFC 273 of all things. So he's been on the shelf for a while. He is coming back here, trying to get back in the win column. In order to do so, he will have to get past Hafez. 32-year-old Syrian by way of Philadelphia, by way of Denver, is 8-4-1 overall. He's 0-1 in the UFC. He made his debut last July as a late replacement opponent for Jack Della Maddalena. Performed so well in defeat that in the eyes of most observers, Della Maddalena's stock was perceived to have taken a hit, and presumably Hafez's stock had a corresponding rise. That's certainly reflected in the line here because Hafez is nearly a 3-1 favorite. He's minus 290, Gall plus 230. I get it, man. I always forget about Mickey Gall when we talk about, what fighter in the modern era came to the UFC with the least professional experience, and Brock Lesnar came to the UFC when he was, 1-0.
Yeah.
Like Mickey Gall came to the UFC when he's 1-0, and there may never be a weirder first 3 fights for a UFC fighter than Mike Jackson, Phil Brooks, and Sage Northcutt. Like,
yeah,
it's. And here's the thing. Like, Gall looked great in throttling 2 guys that didn't belong in the UFC.
A photographer or whatever he was.
A photographer and a pro wrestler with chronic neck and back vertebrae problems.
The one pro wrestler that doesn't have muscle on his body either.
Yeah, the one that was going to fight as a welterweight.
Yeah. He's got smaller arms than I have.
But so that was fun. But once Gall moved up into the realm of fighting even decent mid-level UFC welterweights, reality set in quickly. He's actually made it longer in the UFC than I thought he would. Here's the problem. When he got to the UFC, and he was, I think at the time, he was 25 or 26, and it was very famously the Dana White looking for a fight thing where, I mean, he didn't just come out and say it, but he's like, I'm looking for a couple fighters bad enough that they won't embarrass Phil Brooks because he's coming to the UFC. And they ended up picking up Gall and Jackson. Gall had some potential upside. He was a good grappler who, while he was young, was, he had a good sized frame for the division. He was a Miller Brothers disciple, already had a good submission game. And he's improved in some ways since then, because if you look back at the version of him that got to the UFC, the version of him that choked out Sage Northcutt, and I mean, that's kind of a wild result. But you look at that version of him, and he looks like what he is, a 25-year-old kid who had just barely quit driving bread trucks for Walmart by day and had just barely started to be able to actually train full time. If you look at him now, he is physically transformed. Like, he looks like a UFC welterweight now. He's 6'2", 170. He looks like a guy that probably cut some weight to get to the weight limit, but it hasn't made him a better athlete. And while he's a better striker than he was, in 2016, 2017, he's still not a great striker. And most of all, he is a submission artist who is just not a good wrestler. He's not a very good wrestler offensively or defensively. And it's kind of what has set the ceiling on how good he can be. There's some things that Gall does well, but top 15 welterweights don't get soundly out wrestled by Mike Perry and Alex Morono.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason why Hafez is such a big favorite here. Like, Hafez right now, he's cruising on having really taken it to Jack Della Maddalena, because even speaking as a hometown Fury guy, most of the people that Bassil Hafez beat on the way up, they're just regional dudes. I expected Della Maddalena to thrash Hafez, and I figured even if Hafez had some decent upside, he's a 31-year-old making his UFC debut. So yeah, he looked great against Della Maddalena. I have no idea whether he's gonna stick around for 5 years and actually kind of make like a late career run on this division, kind of like Matt Brown did, or he's just going to wash out after his first 4 fights. But I do feel pretty strongly he's going to get past Gall, because if he wants to keep it on the feet, even though he's shorter and more compact than Gall, I don't think he's going to have any problem like hitting him. Gall is very hittable. Gall doesn't fight as long as he is. And if Hafez wants to take Gall down, like if he wants to tempt things that way, Gall is a good grappler, but starting on your back, having been taken down by a big, strong dude who's going to scoop you up with a double leg and like slam you down, is not a great way to get your grappling game going in modern MMA. This bad matchup for Gall. Give me Hafez in a pretty dominant decision where he wins all 3 rounds and it's not that competitive.
Yeah, you said you forgot about Gall. I mean, the guy hasn't fought in 2 years, so besides forgetting on it, it is hard to know what we're getting. That said, I'll say this. He's in his prime years now, so we might be getting the best version we've ever seen of him. Now, again, that's so hard to gauge, but when you look at his, I always thought of him as just like a complete bum, and then when you look at his record, it's like the guy's 6-5 in the UFC. I mean, take that for what it's worth. He's beating up CM Punk and Mike Jackson, and I do think the Sage Northcutt win is I rank it higher than I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people think Sage Northcutt is a bum, and I don't.
No, and seriously, considering that Northcutt's wrestling is actually pretty good, it's such a weird aberration. Like, I think 2 or 3 years later, Northcutt would have thrashed him. Like, it's just such a weird performance. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Gall, he's a long and lengthy fighter. He's not much of an athlete, though. He likes to work from distance, throwing straight shots down the pipe. Doesn't like being pressured, though. He doesn't like being pressured. He actually has a pretty decent step back right hand. He's a point fighter, though, not much power. Defensively, he keeps his chin high in the air, big target. He's got good leg kicks, but he's a weak offensive wrestler, as you mentioned. He's one of those like guys who you could tell all his grappling is in the BJJ room, where you guys starting on their knees and stuff like that. He's a weak defensive fighter, and he makes it worse by jumping guillotine. I mean, the guy you mentioned, he struggled to get Mike Perry off of him. He has a submission threat. He's been in a lot of wars. Like, he's taken a lot of damage. I mean, Mike Perry beat him up. Mike Malott beat him up bad. Even a fight like against Diego Sanchez, he faded late in that fight, so that's concerning. Hafez, dude, this might be one of the biggest step downs in competition. Then think about it. He went from taking a fight against Jack Della Maddalena in your UFC debut on days' notice to going to having a full camp against Mickey Gall in your next fight. Like, what? And like you said, a lot of people believe that Hafez beat Jack Della Maddalena. He, what I've seen of him on the feet, he switches stance a lot, pretty tight boxing, good volume. He can be a little wild. He lacks power because he throws a lot of arm shots, which is surprising because he's a big, physically fit guy. He drops his hands. He keeps his chin high. Jack Della Maddalena hurt him to the body in that fight. He's a very, very physically strong wrestler. He's a good wrestler. He wrestles a lot. Not just being a good wrestler, but like going to it, as you mentioned, like not what you can do, but how you do it. He wrestles a lot. He passes to a better position. He's got 4 subs on his record. I am a little worried about his cardio because he faded against Jack Della Maddalena in their fight, but I think the optics weren't good. He was breathing a lot, but again, he took it on short notice, had to cut a lot of weight, I'm assuming. I mean, the line speaks for itself. I like Hafez here. I mean, Gall's best chance is trying to keep the distance and win with long strikes, but I expect Hafez just to get right in his face. I think Hafez forces Gall on his back foot. Then he, mixes in a takedown. I expect him to be better than Gall, from on top than Gall is on the bottom. I think he advances position. I think he wins with ease. Give me Hafez by unanimous decision.
Next up, welterweights take the cage again as injury treats us to one of the weirder or more unexpected rematches in recent memory in the UFC, with Niko Price taking on Alex Morono. Price, the 34-year-old Floridian, is 15-7 with 2 no contests overall. He is 8-7 with 2 no contests in the UFC. He is coming in on a 2-fight losing streak. Got knocked out by Phil Rowe back in December of 2022. Then came back last July at UFC 290, and in 38 seconds took one for the team being all of us, and gave Robbie Lawler just a fantastic send-off moment. He is stepping back into the cage here for the first time since last July, so 9 or 10 months. He had been scheduled to fight Jeremiah Wells. Wells had to withdraw within the last week. In steps Alex Morono. Morono, 33-year-old Houstonian, is 24-9 with 1 no contest overall. He is 13-6 with 1 no contest in the UFC. He's already fought once this year. It was back in April at UFC Fight Night Ailin versus Curtis 2, where he took a unanimous decision over Court McGee. Morono steps in here, and despite the late notice, despite the outcome of their first meeting, he is a comfortable favorite. Minus 225, Price plus 185 coming back here. So for those who don't remember, weren't around for it, these two fought back in 2017, so a little over 7 years ago. Price was getting the worst of a slugfest and then just slept Morono with a second round buzzer beating. I want to say it was a left that just left the man slumped against the cage, senseless. Fantastic win for Price. The good times did not last for very long, though, as that was subsequently overturned when Price tested positive for cannabis. I mean, react to that how you will, but those of us who saw what happened in the cage, he came back to knock out Morono.
Well, you get that superpower. The potheads are known to be able to crack.
Here's the thing, and I'll say this. Very rarely is a fighter's record, just wins and losses in the column on paper, a good indicator of the kind of fighter they are. But in Niko Price's case, it is absolutely correct. He is 8-7 with 2 no contests after fights were overturned when he popped for weed. A barely over 500 fighter with 2 weed no contests. That is Niko Price. That throw in 7 kids. And
you probably smoke weed too. If you had 7 kids, you'd probably have to smoke some joints too.
Oh my goodness. I would just have this weird hot box helmet on all the time. Oh, and I had 4. I mean, but my goodness. Anyway.
And think about when you're smoking a joint, you don't even want to freaking have, you don't want to do anything. You just want to relax.
I want to eat some chips and watch Family Guy. Yeah.
How many kids would you have if he didn't smoke joints?
Oh my goodness. Well, Here's the thing. He might have 15 kids and he can only remember 7 of them because he smoked so much weed. Here's the thing. So Morono is coming in as a comfortable favorite here, despite coming in on like a week's notice, despite the fact that 7 years ago anyway, Price knocked him in the next week. I think that's an indicator of a couple of things. One is that Morono has improved as a fighter since then, whereas Price has been very much the same. The only thing that has changed for Niko Price is that weed is no longer enforceable, so he's probably not going to get any more no contests. And then the other part of it is that, yeah, the ending gif of that fight, if you just watch the last 7 seconds, doesn't look great for Morono. But up until then, he was absolutely putting it on Price. Arguably a 10-8 first round. He was probably winning the second round until the last 15 seconds. So anybody who actually watched the tape was like, yeah, you know, I don't know how it looks if they fight 10 times, though we're getting there. But it only looks like that probably once. Here's like
Price is so wasted he doesn't know that they fought once.
He might not remember.
He's baked.
Morono has improved over the years in the ways that he can. Because if I were to do a scouting report on Alex Morono in 2017, 2018, the time they fought, I would have said, okay, his shortcomings are he's not a huge welterweight and he's an average athlete for the division. He's a better athlete than he looks, you know, because he's got the whole thing where he used to be really overweight. So even in his best shape, he has a little bit of a muffin top. Like he looked, he doesn't. Well, here's a good example. A guy that he just
has that.
A guy that he just beat fairly recently, Gall. Like Gall looks like much more of an athlete than Morono, but you put those two guys through the NFL Combine, I'm thinking Morono probably beats him in like the shuttle drill and the dash and stuff. Just
yeah, but neither one of them can catch a ball.
No. So those are things that we're never really going to improve. The things that he can improve have improved in some ways because he was an elite grappler who was very reluctant to turn to it, and he was and remains very hittable because what Niko Price did to him, Santiago Ponzinibbio did within the last 2 years, where Morono was on his way to his 5th win in a row, one of the bigger names he'd beaten in the UFC, and halfway through the 3rd round, he gets caught with one big punch that turns the whole fight on its head. So that's still the way to beat Alex Morono. Like you can beat him the hard way, like Anthony Pettis did, but the easy way to beat Alex Morono, if there is one, is wait for him to make a mistake on the feet, hit him once hard. He can be hurt. Like Price is just still the same guy he was. He has good offensive weapons and a serious commitment to using them. I mean, he is all action, but he's defensively porous and he's so wild that he ends up in situations that the way Randy Brown knocked him out, we'll never see that again in the UFC. Like, how did you guys even end up in that position? Here, this one breaks down very much like their first fight for me, only Morono has the disadvantage of coming in on short notice, though Alex doesn't have much of a weight cut. So it may not make a huge difference. But it's also that, you know, Morono has shown more of a willingness to turn to his wrestling and turn to his grappling than he did 5 or 6 years ago. So all in all, I think it plays out about like it did 7 years ago. I think Morono is going to probably beat up Price. The question will be whether Price catches Morono in a moment of inattention, either early before Morono really kind of dials in the distance and the rhythm like Chaos Williams did to him, or late when both guys are tired, things are getting a little sloppy like Price did, like Ponzinibbio did. I'm betting against that this time. I'm going with Alex here. I don't think it's too controversial a pick. Again, he's more than the 2-1 favorite, but give me Alex Morono by decision in a back and forth war that will probably be a whole hell of a lot of fun. It might even creep into consideration for fight of the night, but unless Price catches Morono with just that one sweet shot, there won't be any question of who won the fight.
I want to see Mickey Gall and Alex Morono in that drill where you run and the ball gets shot at you from different directions.
Oh.
Niko Price, what a character this guy is. I don't want the UFC ever to cut him just because I don't know what's gonna happen in the fight, but it's gonna be something bonkers. I'll always think of Niko Price when me and him would talk, like set up an interview. This is like, oh God, it had to be like 7 years ago.
Oh, okay. Like continue, but I might have something to chip in here. Yeah.
So, I'm like, I remember he's like, oh, what can you do? I'm like, he's like, oh, Saturday's really good for me. I'm like, all right, cool. And I'm trying to try to be flexible. I'm like, hey, I'm kind of free all day Saturdays. You just tell me what's best and I'll make it work. And then he's like, all right, cool. So let's do 7 a.m. It was 7 a.m. on a Saturday to interview him. And I'm like, who the hell asked for a 7 a.m. interview on a Saturday? But
hey, those babies aren't going to make themselves. He's got to get an early start to his weekend.
Yeah.
How was the interview?
I don't even remember. Like probably it's normal.
Nah. This first time I ever interviewed Alex, and this is like years before we were any kind of friend, years before I trained at his gym. I interviewed him at his gym, and we were talking about various fights from his past, and he was talking about the Niko Price fight, and he was like, yeah, with Niko Price, he's just such a weird and awkward guy. And I'm like, oh, tell me about it. I interviewed him once, and yeah, he's like, and Alex just starts laughing. He's like, I meant his fight style, but yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I think I might have interviewed Alex Morono for the Niko Price fight. Now that I think about it, I used to do a lot of interviews back in the day. I don't really do many anymore. Niko Price, I mean, he's a good athlete, I'll say that. But all the wars he's been in has probably taken a toll. I mean, he looked horrendous against Robbie Lawler. It was a quick fight. He was knocked out early, but this was the ghost of Robbie Lawler knocking him out. Price likes to press the action. He doesn't handle it getting bullied back. That's why he looks so bad against Vicente Luque and Jeff Neal. They really pushed him back. He's got he's long and lengthy. He likes to work behind a long jab. He has plus power. He tries to be controlled, but he can easily be drawn into a brawl. He's one of these guys. He's willing to land a shot to eat a shot to land a shot, I should say. He's got insane toughness, but it appears his chin is kind of forced him not to be able to fight that way, but he doesn't know it yet. I mean, he's been knocked out in back-to-back fights. He will use his size well in the clinch. He's got strong, dirty boxing. He batters with knees and elbows inside. He uses feints well to get to better angles as he's moving the guy. Not much of an offensive wrestler, not much of a defensive wrestler. I mean, Michel Pereira took him down 3 times in their fight. Well, though Pereira is a much, much underrated wrestler. Doesn't get enough credit for how good he is. Pretty good submission artist. He will scramble, but the problem is he'll put himself in bad positions trying to chase a submission. Though he is hard to hold down. He's a big guy, and he's got good cardio. I mean, even if he lost, he had a really good output against Phil Rowe. Morono, I mean, he's a high volume striker. He moves a lot. I've said this before. He kind of likes to stick and move and bounce around off the center line, similar to Dominic Cruz. And he did that very well against Matthew Semmelsberg. So it was really struggled to catch up with the speed. He can also be drawn to a brawl himself. He's he doesn't mind biting down the mouthpiece and throwing down. He gets in the pocket and he lets his hands go. He did struggle to get inside against Tim Means. Struggled with his length. He looked slower against Court McGee in a fight that I really thought he was just going to walk through McGee. It was a much closer fight than I thought. I mean, he clearly won, but I think his hand speed might be slowing a little bit. He is an underrated power, as you said. Like, he doesn't look like he's a guy that would sting you with a shot, but he can. He will load up a little bit too much on his shots, and he's not a one and done striker. Though I think he thinks he is. He's got a pretty good kicking game, throws a lot of kicks. He will toss out some spinning attacks, which I hate. His defense, he just constantly moving his head off the center line, which is hard to hit. Though he didn't move his head as much against Court McGee, which was surprising. He's a weak offensive wrestler. He's a terrible defensive wrestler. He is a BJJ black belt. Obviously, you know that better than I do. Really fast guillotine. That's one of his specialties. He will play BJJ, and that really keeps him on the bottom a lot. He struggles against really good wrestlers. He'll toss up some submission attempts, but he might be showing some signs of decline. I mean, he gassed a little bit in the Buckley fight, though that loss doesn't look too bad. I'm not very high on either guy. Morono is the cleanest striker, but I think he's slowing. Price should have, I don't want to say that should have the better output, but he might have the advantage in the cardio. I can't trust his chin. I'm not really confident in either guy. Fuck it, dude. I'll just back your boy too. I see Morono gets his advantage. Like you said, he was putting on him last time. He's more tactically sound. He seems like he actually will go out there with a game plan. I don't know if Price will. I'll say it's closer than the line suggests. I'll say it's a split decision. Give me Morono by split decision.
Welterweights take the cage once again as Phil Rowe squares off against Jake Matthews. Rowe, the 33-year-old New York native, is 10-4 overall. He's 3-2 since joining the UFC out of season 3 of Dana White's Contender Series. He did lose his last time out. He fought just once last year. It was at UFC on ABC, Emmett versus Topuria, where he dropped a split decision to Neil Magny. That snapped a 3-fight win streak for Rowe. He'll try to get to work on a new win streak against Matthews. 29-year-old Australian is 19-7 overall. He's 12-7 in the UFC. He is alternated wins and losses for, feels like the last 4 or 5 years. He is coming off a loss. He dropped a unanimous decision to Michael Morales at UFC Fight Night Ailin versus Craig last November. This is one of the 3 fights on the entire card that is closer than a 2-1. So I will ask you, Keith, your favorite is minus 150. Your underdog around plus 115 or plus 120. Who are they?
Rowe's the favorite.
Jake Matthews is your favorite. Jake Matthews minus 150. Phil Rowe, again, just barely in the plus money. Man. Jake Matthews feels like, I mean, he doesn't literally, but it's the same vibe as like every girl I went to high school with, in that, like, I feel like he's going to be 29 years old forever.
Okay.
Like, how is this dude still in his 20s? I feels like he's been in the UFC for 15 years. It's just, anyway, I am going to flip this one to you.
Okay.
That was my lead into saying, after, I think, not 8 or 9 years in the UFC, I think he was 20 when he started. After this will be his 20th UFC fight.
Wow.
I still don't know. So I have to ask you, what is Jake Matthews good at? I know he's been in the UFC for half his life, and I know that he's won.
Fights,
and I know that he's won a lot more than he's lost. But if you asked me to give you the 3 bullet point scouting report on him, like on a 2002 UFC Chiron, I don't know what it is. So tell me what Matthews is good at, and tell me if you think he beats Rowe.
I think there's some things he's good at. I'll pull back the curtain for a second. So Ben was very gracious with me. I'm home, the only adult, I should say, at home, as my wife's out. And while we're taping, I can see like my son's running to the bathroom. I'm like, what's going on? So in between fights, I go over and he threw up. So I had to be a dad and clean him up. And I started talking to him, talking him back in bed. And after I cleaned up all this puke off the floor, and I'm talking to him, what'd you eat? And the hygiene, like, why do you feel sick? And he said, man, I just saw that Jake Matthews got booked at another pay-per-view card. He threw up. That's a true story. That's what he said. I don't know.
I already know what happens when you're the only adult in the room. What really happened is Bob Chimpson's down in your kitchen cooking something, and he grabbed some like expired milk out of the back of the fridge because he didn't know any better. And like, yeah,
man. No, he probably had friggin' one of Niko Price's brownies. Maybe that's what happened. Heard Jake Matthews. He thought it was at a Dave Matthews concert. What is Jake Matthews good at? He's a pretty good athlete. I think he moves well. Like I think he used to be a terrible striker, and I think he's improved a little bit. He is still a little lower output counter striker. He likes to slip and rip. His hand speed looked better against Darius Flowers. His counter right hand is his best strike. He can throw him a little loopy on his shots, a little too wide. I'll say he has more power than he's credited with. Like he's not gonna like starch guys stuff, but I think he's got a little bit of power. He does target the body, but what he's good at, he's a good wrestler. His striking is to set up his wrestling. And I say that good wrestling, like he gets to fight the guard. Like he's not winning NCAA titles or anything like that, but he's got fast entries. That said, against Michael Morales, he completely abandoned his wrestling. Didn't look for it at all, which I thought was a really bad strategy. If he's on top, solid top control, strong ground and pound, looks to advance position on the ground. He is a submission threat. He has 7 subs. So I guess there's some things I like about him. But I feel like he's a mid-card. Like he's not a fight pass guy, fight pass prelim guy, but he's like that mid prelim guy in a pay-per-view. To me, this is like his ceiling. Rowe is obviously an incredibly long, lengthy guy. I put this in my notes for a while now, but like when he fought Niko Price, he made Niko Price look small, which is a hell of an accomplishment. I said before, he reminds me of Neil Magny, which is funny considering they just fought each other. Yeah. He moves well. He doesn't like being pressured. He wants to keep his range on the feet. He can be a little lower output at times, throwing single strikes. He does well to keep his opponent at the end of his punches, though. He throws straight punches down the pipe. One of the few lengthy fighters that will go down to the body. He beat the crap out of Orion Kosi with just body shots. He has decent power. He has 6 TKOs. Obviously, he has great kicking game. I've said this. Well, I shouldn't say he has a great kicking game. He has good kicks. I've said this before about him. He needs to make that a bigger part of his game. I think it's something that's keeping him from the, moving up to the next tier of guys in the UFC. If he could add the kicks much better. I like how he uses his size well in the clinch, likes knees inside. Not a strong offensive wrestler, but he has a good grapple. He is a submission threat. If he's on top, he's got some good, powerful ground and pound. He has got a great guillotine. But if you put him on his back, he looks for BJJ too much and struggles to get off the back. Because of his weight cut, I still don't trust his cardio. Even a fight against like Niko Price, where it's a 3rd round TKO, he was slowing down in that fight. He got hurt by Niko Price in that fight. He looked better against Neil Magny in a fight that he lost, but like he wasn't hurt bad or anything like that. If I'm not good at extending lines. Like that's not my thing. I'm not a huge gambler. I am surprised that Rowe is the underdog here. He's a much bigger guy. I think he's a better striker. He's probably I don't want to say he's a bigger submission threat, but he's at least equal in the submission game. Obviously, I think Matthews, his clearest avenue for victory is to turn this into a wrestling match. But when he goes for a takedown, he's got to watch that guillotine of Rowe's. I think he might get a takedown, but I think he's going to eat a lot of jabs from distance. I think Rowe might find ways, hopefully, to scramble and get back up to his feet or use those submission attempts to get back to his feet, which is something he hasn't shown, but he has shown improvements in his overall game. I think Rowe is just going to have such an advantage on the feet. I want to take a TKO, but Matthews, he hasn't, been knocked down a really long time, so I'll say Rowe wins the decision in a slight upset.
Yeah, thank you for the breakdown of Matthews. I mean, obviously, I know that there are certain things that he's good at. You don't get to 12-7 in one of the best divisions in the sport without being good at some things. And you kind of talked around this point. The things he's good at aren't necessarily the things you'd think he was good at just to look at him or just to see him at an open workout, like working out in a vacuum. Like he looks like a guy that should be able to starch people. But no, he doesn't have a ton of power, and his striking has always been the last part of his game to come along. And he's a good wrestler who he's found a way to develop effective wrestling despite clearly not having a long amateur background at it. He's not one of these guys that was wrestling from age 7. probably only started wrestling when he started training MMA, and he's found an approach that works. I'll tell you right off the bat that I'm leaning Rowe myself, and my big concern is that Matthews wins this thing with 2 takedowns. Like, that's always the outside possibility.
Yeah, same.
Fun thing about Rowe is, obviously, if talking about what fighters want, if he had his way, he'd be sniping people in an outside kickboxing match. And as you pointed out, he could even afford to let his weapons go a little bit more there. A guy that wants to strike, needs to kick, and is as tall and long-legged as Rowe is, the defensive wrestling is always going to be a question mark. It's interesting because Rowe took a couple of grappling matches within the last 12 to 18 months. And when I saw notice of that just come up on my Twitter feed, or, my kind of set of Google searches that I use to tell me what's going on every morning, I was like, oh, this is interesting. That, Phil Rowe kind of trying to round out his game a little bit. I like when fighters do that. And then I saw what he was doing. You know what karate combat is, right? It's that, like now, like a bunch of like kind of big UFC names like Luke Rockhold and stuff are going to They tried it.
The guy that Rockhold beat is I can't think of his name. He's from around here, and his wife is a media member. She's a very nice lady. I can't think of her name either right now. It's almost midnight. We're deep in this. So
Karate Combat did a grappling only spin-off where they used that same Karate Combat pit but had people grappling in it. And so already Rowe is kind of doing a weird mutant grappling, and then he took on Gordon Ryan and Craig Jones. Like, that's like me saying, you know what? I want to get a little better at basketball. I'm gonna go challenge Steph Curry to a game of horse.
Yeah, Steph Curry, LeBron James. Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, but it's more like I'm gonna go play LeBron James, but I'm also gonna play one of those like places that has like 8-foot rims so I can dunk on it. And so even like less to. And yeah, like Jones tapped him out like 4 times in 5 minutes, including like a flying triangle where he like ran off the wall, like a Showtime kick, only like a Showtime like triangle choke. Yeah, it was bananas. I don't know why I'm digressing into that, except it was just so weird and hilarious and awesome. Here, I'm going with the slight upset as well. Give me Rowe. And I fully expect that even if I'm dead right here, Rowe's going to lose one round where just Matthews gets an easy takedown and does enough to kind of chip away, stay busy on top, do a little bit of damage, threaten to pass his guard, just do enough to keep the ref from standing him up, and that round is a wash. So what I'm really picking is Rowe to kind of piece up Matthews at range in 2 rounds out of 3 and just beat him with better volume and striking that just has better optics, where he's just like jabbing him up cleanly from distance, hopefully throws a few more kicks than usual. But give me Rowe by decision as well here. Second from the top of the UFC 302 prelims is a lightweight matchup between Grant Dawson and Joe Solecki. Dawson, the 30-year-old Nebraskan, is 22-1 as a pro. He's 8-1-1 since joining the UFC out of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. He is coming into this fight off of the first loss of his UFC run. He fought at UFC Fight Night 229 last October. It was a scheduled 5-round fight. Bobby Green needed all of 30 seconds to put Dawson down and out. Fantastic career highlight moment for Green, an ugly setback for Dawson, which snapped what I think was a 14 or 15 fight unbeaten streak for him. So he went back to the drawing board. He's fighting now for the first time this year, and he's looking to get back on track against Solecki. 30-year-old New Jersey native is 13-4 overall. He is 5-2 since joining the UFC out of season 2 of Dana White's Contender Series. He is also coming in off a loss. It was also kind of quick and ugly. He took on Drakkar Klose at UFC on ESPN, Dariush versus Sarukian last December. Klose scooped him up, slammed him, and hurt him bad enough to end the fight. So he's looking to bounce back from that. he is not favored to get it done, to say the least. Dawson, one of the bigger favorites on the card at minus 350, Solecki plus 275. I'll say both of these guys are coming into this fight off of the worst losses of their careers. I don't expect that this fight is going to look like either of their last fights, but I will say this. Dawson is much, much more capable of doing to Solecki what Drakkar Klose did to him than Solecki is of doing to Dawson what Bobby Green did to him. I mean, this is a bad matchup for Solecki, I think. Solecki is a good grappler who is not a great wrestler, not a great athlete, and he's taking on someone in Dawson that is a very good wrestler, a very good grappler, bigger, more athletic. Like, I think this is going to be a bounce back in style for Dawson. My guess is that he gets this thing done pretty quickly, doesn't waste too much time on the feet, takes Solecki down early, beats him up, gets the tap out. Give me Grant Dawson, my first round submission here.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. This is, I kind of see the fight the same way. Grant Dawson, he's a really big guy for the weight class. That's the first thing. And his striking, it's going to sound really silly, but before I forget, the woman's name is Maddie Levine. That's her name. She's a really nice lady. So
she already turned off the show and started writing an angry email to you.
Oh so. Yeah, like I was like super like, look at me, like don't know her name, like big time in her. Sorry, Maddie. Like her husband's gonna freaking spinning wheel kick me in the face when next time I see. He's a really nice guy too, so I root for him. You know, not many. I won't root for him as he knocks my teeth out, but. So back to Grant Dawson. Grant Dawson, his striking has come a really long way. Which is funny after that didn't look like that way against Bobby Green, but he has, fairly quick hands, underrated power. The issue is what we talked about against his defense. He keeps his chin high in the air. I've always said this. He kind of overreacts when he gets hit. He'll spin. He'll stuff like that. Yeah, you got to be worried about his chin coming off that knockout loss against Green, who Green isn't really known for his power. So I like that he's taking some time off Dawson. I love that he added stepping knees to his game. Kicks are a big part of his game. He hard kicks to the body, crushing calf kicks. I go back to like a Nad Narimani fight where I think is an underrated fighter, destroyed him with calf kicks. Then he did the same thing to Mark Madsen, who probably is actually an overrated fighter himself, but beat him with a big calf kick game. Despite improving his striking, though, his game is always centered around his wrestling. He's got good timing as entries, but besides getting to shooting for the legs, he's relentless to get the fight to the ground. He'll keep working it. Good hip control, very good top game. He advances position on the ground. Solecki, I think Solecki's a little more well-rounded than you might have given credit. I think his box is okay. Like he fights out of both stances. He's a good output, technically sound, sets up his shots well with feints. He loves his straight right. He attacks combinations. The problem is he's undersized. He lacks power. He will throw a lot of body kicks. If his opponent's in the opposite stance, he will wrestle. But I think we said he's got good entries. He's good at winning scrambles. But he's not your traditional NCAA wrestler. He doesn't mind being taken down himself because he's a good grappler. He's got super confidence on his BJJ, even on his back. I know they said like he's been doing BJJ since he was 6, and he's got like 8 subs. But go back to like the Drakkar Klose fight. He rushed. He had his grappling with Klose. He rushed to take his back, lost position because of it. He does have a lot of flexibility, so he'll get subs off his back. Slick movement in general on the bottom. But again, in today's MMA, I just don't trust guys on bottom. He also tied himself out in the Jared Gordon fight in a fight that was a very heavy grappling matchup. I think Solecki might be the more well-rounded fighter. I think Dawson is bigger and stronger, exactly like you said. I think he's got if someone's going to grapple and be on top, it's got to be him. I see Solecki spends a majority of the fight on the bottom. Give me Dawson to win a very top side grappling heavy matchup. Dawson by decision.
The top prelim at UFC 302 is a middleweight matchup between Cesar Almeida and Roman Kopylov. Almeida, the 36-year-old Brazilian, is 5-0 as a pro. He's 1-0 in the UFC since joining out of season 7 of Dana White's Contender Series. He made his debut in April at UFC Fight Night, Ailin versus Curtis 2, where he knocked out Dylan Budka in the second round. He'll look to continue his undefeated run here against Kopylov. Kopylov, 33-year-old Russian, is 12-3 overall. He's 4-3 in the UFC. He is coming in off a loss. He got tapped out back in February by Anthony Hernandez in the second round. That snapped a 4-fight win streak for him, all by knockout, that had seen him become all of a sudden the person of interest in the UFC middleweight division. He'll look to regain some of that momentum here against Almeida. This is another of the close lines on the card, so I'll toss it to you. Your favorite is minus 125. Your underdog just barely in the plus money at 105. So this is as close to a pick 'em as we've got on the card. It's a tough one. So who you got? Or who's the favorite?
Kopylov's the favorite.
You are correct. Kopylov is just barely the favorite. Almeida, again, just barely in the plus money. Having said that, the UFC really is doing everything it can to kind of grease the skids for Cesar Almeida to make as much noise in this division as he can. As you pointed out when we previewed his debut just last month, the real point of interest with him, I mean, he's a 36-year-old guy who's 4-0. Why is the UFC signing him? It's because he's been one of the top 5 kickboxers in his weight range for quite a few years now. He had a trilogy with Alex Pereira where, Pereira won 2 of the 3 fights, but all of them were competitive. The UFC would love, I'm sure, for Almeida to be for Pereira what Pereira was for Israel Adesanya, or something similar. And so they matched him up in his UFC debut against a guy, Dylan Budka, that a well-rounded fighter that just, I mean, jury is out on whether he'll end up being UFC material, but I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't. And more importantly, even if he's more well-rounded than Almeida, isn't good enough at the other things, wasn't going to be good enough at the other things to take advantage of Almeida being so green at MMA. Here, well, they have run out of Dylan Budka's defeat to him, but of fighters who are ranked as highly as Kopylov is, because I mean, Kopylov isn't in Sherdog's top 15 at middleweight, but he was getting close before he lost to Anthony Hernandez, because Anthony Hernandez is in our top 15. For a guy that's ranked as high as that, like say he's the 17th or 19th best middleweight, there aren't many guys that are this friendly a style matchup for Cesar Almeida, because Kopylov is a very good kickboxer who has surprisingly good power, despite not being huge for the division. Like he's always bigger than I think he is, but he is not Alex Pereira or Israel Adesanya, by the standards like stature and wingspan. And his biggest weakness has been his ground game. Anthony Hernandez wrecked him on the ground. Carl Roberson, who, had a slightly underrated ground game, that hasn't aged well. So, Kopylov's strengths match up against the things that Almeida is presumably much, much better at. And Kopylov's weaknesses are going to be more or less meaningless in a Cesar Almeida fight. Because I don't follow kickboxing closely, I'm not even going to pretend to have seen all of Cesar Almeida's fights. And it's impossible to do. You notice that anytime someone makes...
Sorry to interrupt you. Obviously, he was a world champion, because everybody in kickboxing has been a world champion.
Exactly. But I mean, picking out the signal from the noise there, okay, no. Almeida really was one of the, he's been a top 5 kickboxer, kind of like worldwide.
He's got a win over. He's got a win over Alex Pereira.
Yeah, he's got a win over Alex Pereira and 2 competitive losses when Almeida probably was, or sorry, Pereira was the guy in that weight range. And you can't watch all of somebody's kickboxing fights. Like, you notice that when somebody gets to the top levels in MMA, we know what their record is. Like, it's big news if we find that like somebody's record in the UFC was wrong. Like there was, a lost fight or a fight. Like Cesar Almeida is a top 5 kickboxer. Sorry to
interrupt you. Sherdog doesn't have it wrong. That must be UFC or some of these other sites. Not Sherdog never has it wrong.
No, well, we win or we learn, but it's because of Sherdog and sites like Tapology that basically were inspired by Sherdog and now exist.
Never heard of that site.
Keller is a good dude.
I don't really know, but yeah.
Well, just all my interactions with him have all been.
I don't know. I know Nolan King works for me. That's my boy. So I'm just joking.
But I mean, you ask. I'll ask Alex Pereira, what's your kickboxing record? He doesn't know. Do I have 50 wins? Do I have 70? Do I count this thing that I went to and I fought 4 times in one night, but it was under Muay Thai rules? Does that count? Because I was like,
is it more like what someone's wrestling record? I was like, like you have S. Like what counts is you told your record, and do we count high school? We count college? We count not all records are equal because you could wrestle in Rhode Island and be 40-0. That's different than the guy who, another guy in Rhode Island, but he also went out to California or he went to Pennsylvania and Texas, and he's 35-5. Yeah, but his 5 losses were to friggin' Bo Bassett. A little different.
Okay. That reminds me, and you'll like this quote because I know that you're definitely like an 80s, 90s metal guy, but I remember Lars Ulrich talking about when he moved to California from Denmark, because of course he's Danish. Yeah. He moved to Denmark and he had been a nationally ranked tennis player in Denmark. And he's like, I quit tennis in like a month because I went from being the 4th best under 17 player in Denmark to being like the 3rd best on my block when I got to LA, So yeah, it's that kind of thing.
Dude, who would have thought like a guy who freaking I don't know. I didn't know he was a tennis player. I don't know. Like, who would have thought a guy in badass Metallica also played tennis? Doesn't fit.
But anyway, all that to say, I'm not going to even pretend to have seen all of Cesar Almeida's fights. But what I've seen, he does all the things that you would expect a top level kickboxer with kind of his body to do. Like he's not Titanic like Alex Pereira. He's not like ridiculously long and lanky like Israel Adesanya. He's a bit more of a compactly built guy, and he makes the best use out of that. Like his kicks are super hard. Like he's got big power in both hands. But not knowing how many matches, like how many kickboxing bouts he's had, like he's 36 years old. I'm sure he's had a lot of them. At least 3 of them were against one of the hardest hitters on the planet. Like, at what point is everything just going to start falling off for this guy? Because if he's fallen off at all, like I still think Kopylov is a fighter on the rise. He's a guy that was knocking decent fighters out left and right, and then ran into, you're in my pick for probably the most underrated guy in that whole division, and maybe one of the maybe the most underrated kind of top 15-ish, top 20-ish guy in the entire UFC. And
can I say this though?
Yeah,
he's not to be underrated because everyone else is catching on to how good he is.
Oh, if he had
like we were on
Dolidze, he was good. Yeah, but if he had ended up fighting Roman Dolidze on the main card of this event like he was supposed to, I think that could have ended up being a coming out party for him. But anyway, Kopylov lost to Hernandez, getting sucked down into Hernandez's territory. Like Hernandez weathered a little bit of a storm early, pulled Kopylov down, and just put him in quicksand. I still think Kopylov is a fighter on the rise. I think even at 33, at 33 as a middleweight, he's dead middle of his prime. So if Almeida has slipped, Kopylov may walk off with just a signature win. It would be the equivalent of when, God, who was it that just lamped Gokhan Saki a few years ago in the middle of his UFC experiment? Was it
Khalil Roundtree?
Thank you. It was Khalil Roundtree that just busted up Gokhan Saki. We may end up with one of those type of moments, but until I see really evidence for it, I'm going to say that Almeida still is the goods. And yeah, this matchup in that case, I think really does favor him. It's a realm where Kopylov is very good and Almeida is world-class. So give me Almeida to bust up Kopylov pretty good here. I'm going to say it makes it to the final horn, but give me Almeida to win a pretty straightforward decision.
Wow, that's surprising. This fight is one I'm very intrigued in, based on a lot of things you said. I mean, I've kind of been a Kopylov guy. I like Kopylov a lot, and I've been back in Cesar Almeida what I've seen. I mean, Kopilov's a good athlete. He's huge for the weight class. You know, he's a southpaw that, you know, he's an outfighter that likes to use his distance, which is why he had so much trouble with Anthony Hernandez, because Anthony Hernandez is going to stay on the gas in your face. He's a very good striker. He has, you know, he's accurate. He's a little bit of a builder. They get stronger as the fight moves on, works behind a good jab, follows up with nice straight shots on the pipe. I like the variety in his striking game. You know, knees, elbows, very good kicking game, crushes the body with kicks. He stopped Puna Soriano with a body kick, stopped Josh Friend with a body kick, knocked out Claudio Ribeiro with a high kick. It's been a while now, but Carl Robeson did have some success moving and kicking his legs. He's an underrated wrestler. He doesn't use his wrestling enough, but he's got nice entries. But he isn't a submission threat. And if you take him down, he's hard to take down. Almeida, he's still a wild card because, yeah, he's this, you know, decorated kickboxer, but he's still so inexperienced. And I wish this guy was 26 and 36. I mean, if this guy was 26, man, he could have become a champion. Like, that's how dynamic I think his striking can be. I mean, like you said, regardless, you know, again, I'm not going to pretend to be the freaking Mel Kiper of kickboxing either. He does have a one-off pad, and I know he lost to him more times than he won, but still, like, that's a pretty hell of an accomplishment. And his striking is what you'd expect. I like him. He's very accurate. His straight right is just a thing of beauty. He really steps into his shots, keeping his base underneath them to land power shots, and he's got crushing power. Though he does surprisingly load up a little bit for a guy so decorated. Not like Paya, where Paya can just hit that switch without even, you know, the short left hook is what puts you out. It's not this big, you know, wind up one. I love how often he goes to the body. He crushes the body. Some defensive things, due to that traditional kickboxing style, he doesn't move a lot. He stands directly in front of his opponent, just kind of like high guard defense, that thing, or he'll pull his head straight back. He likes to defend takedowns with those Travis Brown downward elbows, which I do like too. But, you know, I don't know if he knows, you know, underhooks and whizzers and you know, other avenues for victory. He's a weak defensive wrestler. But what I've liked about him, what I've seen, you know, in the UFC and the Contender Series, is he gets up. Like, he doesn't stay on the bottom. He works back to his feet. Now, I've seen him give up his back to get up there, which is a little gutsy. If he's on top, he's got mean ground and pound. I like this fight a lot. And I love that the fight's a pick 'em. Like, when this was announced, I thought Kopylov, based on his, you know, his name recognition, and then he was on this run, and his fight with Anthony Hernandez was, you know, kind of billed as like the guy's just out the top 15 that's gonna kind of make a run. Kopylov has the better kicking game. He's the better wrestler. He has more avenues for victory. I just like the way Almeida rips the body. I just keep thinking about it. I think he might get taken down by Kopylov. Yeah, but he can seem to get high kicks, something like that. But I think he gets back to the feet. I think he works the body. And I think I'm with you, man. I think he starts taking over. And we got back-to-back upset picks, consensus up picks. Let's give me Almeida by second round TKO.
The 5-fight main card of UFC 302 opens up with a welterweight contest between Randy Brown and Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Brown, the 33-year-old Jamaican by way of New York, is 18-5 overall. He is 12-5 since joining the UFC as the outgoing Ring of Combat welterweight champ. He is on a 2-fight win streak. Fought Wellington Turman last summer, took a unanimous decision over him, then came back this February at UFC Fight Night Dolidze versus Imavov and knocked out Muslim Salikov in the first round. He will look to stretch it to 3 in a row here against Elizeu Capoeira. 37-year-old Brazilian is 24-7-1 overall. He's 10-3-1 since joining the UFC as the outgoing Jungle Fight welterweight champ. He is coming in off a weird majority draw against Rinat Fakhretdinov, which was at the UFC Sao Paulo last November, the Almeida versus Lewis card. That was a majority draw. Prior to that, he'd been on a 2-fight win streak over Benoit Saint-Denis and Abubakar Nurmagomedov. You may remember the Saint-Denis fight because it feels like a million years ago. It was that legendary beating that gave no indication of what a monster Saint-Denis would become. But, well, that's a win that's aged well for Easy dos Santos. Here, he's looking to stretch his unbeaten streak to 4 straight. This is the last of the somewhat close lines on the card, so I will toss it out here, but I don't think it'll be too difficult for you. Your favorite is -180. Your underdog is +150. Who are they, Keith?
You say it's not going to be difficult. Now I'm like, oh, man. I think Randy Brown is the favorite.
You are correct. Randy Brown is the favorite here. I'm going to flip this one to you first. I'm just going to throw out the observation first that do they have some sort of warehouse in Brazil where they just walk down the racks and they pull out a guy that looks like Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos just in the appropriate size? It's like, oh, you need a bantamweight? They give you like Rafael Sunsao. Like, oh, you need a lightweight? Yeah, they give you like Rafael dos Anjos in his beard phase. Like that's your like. I guarantee you, I could find one for every men's weight class and probably one or two of the women's if I think about it hard enough. But all right, tell me who wins this one and what it looks like.
Yeah, this is a fun fight. Two guys that are just, I think they're fun fighters to watch. Randy Brown, long, lengthy kickboxer, range kickboxer, moves around the cage so well with really good footwork. Uses feints well to set up his shots. Quick hands, such a crisp jab. Uses that jab to keep the distance. Very big kicking game. He uses those long legs, just easily touch the calves. But he'll throw teep kicks and stuff to keep you back, which is the best part of the game. But because of his long legs, he's also open to leg kicks. Like I always go back to that Vicente Luque fight where he was actually dropped by leg kicks. What I love about Brown is I see his intelligence continue to grow. And I said this last time when he fought. If his opponents crash the pocket, try to close that distance, it's Brown that'll meet them there, and he'll grab the clinch. And now you're on the defense, which I love. So you come inside, and this is what you're eating. You're eating knees up the middle. Getting battered in that. I think he's an underrated wrestler. He'll look for takedowns. He almost has that like Michael Chiesa long arm style, which just reaches down and drops you. So I think he's underrated there. He also use his size and get some body lock takedowns. He does need to control a little bit. I get that's some just not being a traditional folk style wrestler. He does have 4 submission wins, and he really has improved. Early in his UFC run, the way to beat him was take him down and hold down, and he's really improved on his get-up game. He's hard to hold down now. Zaleski dos Santos, it's impressive being at his age and still be as good of an athlete that he is. He can fight out of both stances. He's got high output in his striking, really nice snap on his shots, plus power. I like his teep kicks. He can overextend at times, leaving him open to, being a big target. Some of this has to do with that capoeira style where, he'll try something flying or something like that, which leaves him open to be countered. A chin is a little bit of a concern. I mean, Lyman Good hurt him. Li Jingliang hurt him. Muslim Salikov all hurt him. But not lately. Lately he's been a wrecking. Well, it's been a long time since he really went to his wrestling, but he showed against like Curtis Miller that he can wrestle. He's a weaker defensive wrestler. He's been taken down God knows how many times in the UFC, but he showed improved takedown defense in that Abubakar Nurmagomedov fight, and he's got good cardio, which is surprising for a guy his age. I think it's a solid fight. Brown is really coming into his own. Zaleski to me has shown that he still has something left. And I was kind of writing his obituary not that long ago. That said, I agree with the line. I feel like this might be a little bit of a passing of the torch fight. I think Brown might be better than Zaleski everywhere. Zaleski might have a power advantage, but I see Brown piecing him up from distance with the jab, with the teep kicks. I think he might control him in the clinch. He might even get a takedown or two. Give me Brown by decision.
You know what's great about welterweight? What's great about welterweight worldwide?
Like everything.
Yeah, but especially in the UFC, where 80 or 85% of the top talent in that division is probably concentrated right now. It's that, one, it's one of the biggest, it's probably the biggest weight class where you have this kind of mix of guys are good athletes, they're well-rounded, but they're big enough that a lot of them have great power. But it's also that as deep as the division is, it's really short on perfect fighters. Like outside of George St. Pierre, who, just was the ultimate game plan follower, and because of that had a kind of reviled title run just because we were so spoiled by his dominance. Outside of that,
and then he still got knocked out by Matt Serra.
And still got knocked. Like, you can't plan for everything. Also, he became an even more conservative fighter after the Serra fight.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, jab, Superman punch, take him down in the last minute of the round. Don't pass his guard. Wash, repeat. Anyway, like outside of St. Pierre and in the post St. Pierre era, same as before St. Pierre came along, even at the top levels, they were never perfect fighters. Like, it's kind of wild that in a division as great as welterweight, Robbie Lawler made it to the title. Like, Robbie Lawler is an incredibly awesome fighter, but he was never a perfect fighter. Like, even at his best, he had vulnerabilities. There were things he never got good at. And then you just followed all the way down. Like, and one of my go-to things has always been welterweight has this mass of people right outside of the rankings, kind of your 12 through 25 guys, where they're good, aggressive, they're all very good offensive fighters, but they have just enough fight IQ issues or just enough defensive lapses that it's really hard to string along enough wins to break into the top 10. Randy Brown was one of those guys. Niko Price has been one of those guys forever. Vicente Luque was one of those guys for a long time. Alex Morono is kind of floating around in there. Like, there's just so many of them. Like, that's why welterweight is such a treat. Because everything you say about Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos is true, and his approach shouldn't work as well as it does in a division as good as welterweight. I mean, we're talking about a guy that Capoeira kicked Sean Strickland's head off. Yeah. Like, and that wasn't that long ago. Like, yeah, he's awesome. Brown, I already referred to this when we talked about Niko Price a few fights ago. Like, his loss to Niko Price, it is a position, a situation that we'll never see again, even if we make it to UFC 1000, 15 years from now. That'll never happen again. It was just the most welterweight thing ever. Brown is no longer the guy that stuff happens to. No. Brown now just has normal limitations that are just based on his frame. Like, being as huge as he is gives him certain advantages, gives him certain disadvantages.
Wouldn't Brown be like a negative 400 favorite right now if he fought Niko Price?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, he absolutely would. Brown, I love that you pointed out that he counters the clinch by being the one who initiates it when the guy is coming in. And that has got to be daunting, because he is huge, and he's a huge guy with long, skinny legs. He has very much like the John Jones build. Like, his arms and shoulders are big. I'm sure it's miserable to, like, clinching with someone. Yeah. Thank you. Like, clinching with someone that's like taller than you and has a big, strong upper body, it's miserable. Like, the announcers will always say, like, just make the guy wear your weight. No, it feels like you're wearing like the guy's entire weight on like your thighs and your shoulders. And then on top of that, he's kneeing you, he's elbowing you. if you don't pay attention, he's going to reach down and like grab, like basically, he's going to grab a single leg without even bending over.
Yeah.
And then,
snatch or a knee pick or something. Yeah.
Like he's on his way to becoming the best fighter that Randy Brown could possibly be with kind of his background, his physique. And that is not something I would have picked. I would have picked that Randy Brown becomes a guy that wins 2, loses 1, wins 2, loses 1 until the wheels fall off. But no, he came up short against Jack Della Maddalena, and that was kind of his first shot at a fight where, okay, if you win this, you are a top 10 welterweight in the UFC. But at 33 and not showing any signs of wear, I think he's going to get more chances at it. And I think getting past Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos on Saturday is going to be a big part of that. You called it a possible passing of the torch moment. I like that because I could see this being a fight that feels really competitive right up until one fighter gets a shocking finish. This one, it feels like the kind of fight that is going to deserve fight of the night, even if it doesn't get it. Give me Brown. And I can say give me Brown by like a late finish. It's like I could see him just grabbing a guillotine or something on tired and beat up Dos Santos in the 3rd round, or like hitting him with something big and then kind of pouring it on and teeing off on him. I'm going to be a little sassy and say submission, but TKO wouldn't surprise me either. But yeah, give me Randy Brown by 3rd round finish. Heavyweights are up next as Jailton Almeida takes on Alexander Romanov. Almeida, the 32-year-old Brazilian, is 20-3 overall. He is 6-1 since joining the UFC out of season 5 of Dana White's Contender Series. He is 4-1 at heavyweight or at catchweights above the light heavyweight limit. That's all the good news. The bad news is that his one loss in the UFC was in his last outing. He got knocked out early in the 2nd round by Curtis Blades back in March at UFC 299. That snapped a 6-fight win streak in the UFC, something like a 14-fight win streak overall for the hulking Brazilian. So he's going to look to get back on track here. He had been scheduled to fight Alexander Volkov. Volkov was forced to withdraw, and the UFC swapped in Alexander Romanov, perhaps hoping that their names were similar enough and they both had blonde hair and we wouldn't notice. But we did notice. And so I am going to introduce the right guy. Romanov, 33-year-old Moldovan, is 17-2 overall. He is 6-2 in the UFC. He is coming in off a win. He fought most recently last July at UFC on ESPN, Strickland versus Magomedov, where he took a unanimous decision over Blagoy Ivanov. That snapped the streak comprising the only 2 losses of Romanov's career so far, where he lost to Marcin Tybura and to Volkov in back-to-back fights. So Romanov is looking to start up a new win streak, prove that he does in fact have a future as a contender, possible champion in the heavyweight division. He is not favored to get that done. Almeida is minus 275, Romanov plus 225. Never say never, because it is MMA. It is heavyweight MMA where almost everyone has a ton of power and the skill level is lowest. So weird things can happen. But outside of regular MMA chaos, this was one of the easier fights on the card for me to call. And it's because I still think Jailton Almeida is an elite heavyweight, or at least a heavyweight with elite upside that he's still in the process of developing. Whereas I don't believe Alexander Romanov is back based on his last appearance. Here's the thing. Romanov, when he got to the UFC, he was a whole lot of fun. If you're a heavyweight that shows any kind of promise, and if you're a regular listener of our show, you're going to hear me say this right now for what must be the 20th time, but you can get a long way at heavyweight by having one elite skill and enough aggression, balls, fight IQ to leverage that one skill. Like, look how far Waldo Cortez Acosta got on a jab before. Okay, he finally decided to wrestle a little bit, I think, his last time out. But Romanov, I mean, is built like a fire hydrant by the standards of the division, like a guy barely over 6 feet tall that he was coming in right at the heavyweight limit, just this barrel-chested dude who obviously comes from a Greco background because his whole game is just running over, picking the other guy up, doing the most high amplitude, unnecessarily high amplitude takedown possible, rinse and repeat. And again, you could, if you can coast for a long time on that at heavyweight, because you got to get through the Roque Martinez's and Jared Vanderas of the world before you really run into the really good fighters. And even as he was kind of steaming through his first 6 fights in the UFC, like just getting big man topside submissions on people like it was 2003. Like Marcos Rogerio de Lima is a borderline rankable heavyweight, and Romanov made him quit just by putting his forearm on his face. I think the arm triangle choke he hit on Roque Martinez might be the most technical submission he's pulled off in the UFC. There were 2 things going on. One, Romanov was actually improving. Like his approach didn't change, but I think I pointed this out ahead of one of his last couple of fights. He went from coming into his fights at 266 pounds to like 261, 255. He came in for, I think, the Sherman or Tybura fights around like 243. He was just coming in better shape. But at heavyweight, lifting another heavyweight over and over again and throwing him through the air is just not a recipe for success. And his gas tank was a known problem. In the midst of him, again, just smashing all the worst heavyweights in the UFC, that one split technical decision over Juan Espino kind of gave a clue to what the problem was going to be. Because Espino's another guy, I mean, has a little more nuance to his game than Romanov, but another guy that's just got by on like big man slams and then just a heavy topside game. But Romanov got so tired that when he got fouled in the 3rd round of that fight, he literally asked the ref, if I can't continue, does it go to decision or is it a no contest?
Yeah.
That's not a good look. That's just, so, he ran into Marcin Tybura, and yeah, he had some success early, got tired, and to quote our buddy Devin Tejada, host of Check the Kick on SureDog.com, frequent feature on our shows, Romanov has that cardio that's like an electric toothbrush. Like it's going and it's going and it's going. As soon as it starts to slow down, you got 10 seconds to finish your business. And then it's not going to be any good anymore. He's got like the opposite of like the Derek Lewis, Yoel Romero cardio where, yeah, I'm breathing through my mouth, but I'm still in this fight. Like when Romanov is done, he's toast. I don't think any of those problems were fixed against Blagoy Ivanov. Yeah, he made it to the final horn and he won all 3 rounds, but the version of Ivanov that he fought last summer, like, this is going to sound mean to Ivanov, and it's not meant to be, but he has always been just kind of a nullifier. He wasn't a great athlete, just a good, strong wrestler, a decorated Sambo guy, obviously. But Ivanov, by the time they fought, like, it's like the difference between playing someone one-on-one in basketball versus just dribbling a basketball around with ankle weights on. Like Ivanov was ankle weights at that point. Yeah, he provided some resistance to what Romanov wanted to do, but the real test of your cardio is when someone else is making you go places you don't want to go. Like if I'm rolling with a friend, I can go for 20 minutes because I can take a, I can take a breather when I want. I can go hard when I want. If I'm going like hostile, not hostile, but like competitive rolling, I'm toast in 2 minutes because the other guy's making me move now. You move now or he's on your back. You move now or he's throwing you through the air. Like Ivanov didn't do that to Romanov. Almeida is going to make Romanov do things he doesn't want to do. And yeah, we saw the shortcomings in Almeida's game in his last couple fights. Like, he completely washed Derek Lewis, but it was such an inert win that, I mean, if it hadn't taken place in Brazil, like, people would have been booing the hell out of him. Against Curtis Blades, he ran into someone who was even bigger than he is, or at least as big, just as athletic, and better and more skilled and more refined at a lot of the same things. So we know what Almeida's ceiling is so far, but I don't think that's going to cost him against Romanov. Almeida is going to be a much taller, rangier guy. If they decide to slug it out on the feet, I think he'll at least hold his own there. But ultimately, these are two guys that both want the fight on the ground. I just think it's going to go there when, where, and how Almeida wants it to. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Romanov, out of a clinch, like, ducks under or slips and takes the back standing and takes Almeida for a ride once, but he won't be able to sustain that. Almeida's a live body, and I don't know if Romanov can beat live body top 10 heavyweights right now. So give me Almeida to bounce back big time. I'm going to say we might get a fun first round, but Almeida will be much the fresher guy when the second round comes around, and he'll take Romanov down, just pound him in the mush. Almeida, second round TKO, ground and pound.
Man.
And I am sorry that I just talked for, I think, 12 minutes straight about what I said was the easiest fight on the card for me to pick.
No. I'm the reason I was saying, man, like, dude, this just seems like a paycheck fight for Romanov. Like, this is a terrible stylistic matchup for him. And I agree with a lot of things you were saying. I think you talk about, like, it's harder to, do cardio or, have good cardio when you're doing something you don't want to do. Like, when I was like fighting MMA a million years ago, I remember I used to like train with this guy boxing. He was kind of coming over to, work with me with wrestling because he wanted to do MMA, and I was boxing with him, and he'd be like, man, wrestling is so tiring. I get so tired. Like, how do you not get tired? I'm like, no, I know when to rest. I know what position I'm in. Like, you're flexing and you're resisting, and like, I don't have to. But then in boxing, it's the same thing. Like, sometimes I'm letting my hands go, and he's like, dude, you don't have to like throw. If you're trying to hit the, jab to the body and then an overhand right, throw that jab to the body at like 50% and then throw the overhand right at 100%. It's like, you got to take some off. And he would do that. And that's why he wouldn't gas. Like, he would feel way more comfortable in boxing. He wouldn't gas out because he knew how to conserve his energy at times, So I think that was a really, really good point that you made. Almeida, it's so funny for a guy that, was a light heavyweight at one time. The guy's a massive dude. Long arms, long legs, 79-inch reach. His striking has improved, but he still has way more areas of growth. He's still not confident in it. Obviously, due to his size, he has power. He'll throw some kicks, but they're more for distraction. But he'll throw some teep kicks or some calf kicks. He's a good wrestler. He's fast. He will shoot without a setup, which is concerning, and it's the second or third time that it's a little hard to defend. But I'm impressed that he got takedowns against Curtis Blades. Like, that was impressive to me. He slammed Shamil Abdurakhimov. He's got smother in top position. He'll work inch by inch before, just to secure a position and before looking for submissions. He advances on the ground, but he has no issue stalling in any dominant position. Perfect example is fighting against Derek Lewis. He also do, he was on top for long periods. He'll also backpack and have no problem, like, just holding on and having you carry his weight. He's got very good mat return game. He's got good back takes. He's got 10 submission wins. If you tape him now, he is strong off his back. I've seen some subs there. He does have, he uses BJJ. You're looking for submission instead of trying to find a way to get up. But he did hit a sweep. I think it was on the Contender Series. I saw him hit a nice sweep. If he's on top, I mean, he dispatched brutal ground and pound against Danilo Marquez and Jairzinho Rose strike. But it's when, again, he'll wait till he has, he has no problem holding you down before he lets that go. I am worried about his cardio a little bit. He's against Derek Lewis, he showed he can go 25 minutes, but he wasn't a high paced action, all out action.
And that brutal ground and pound was largely absent.
Yeah, he did. He just held on. And I think it wasn't fun, but it was a wise plan based on what we've seen. Derek Lewis he's a guy that I know Daniel Cormier did it, but that's, Daniel Cormier is in that 1%, is he,
his Almeida's whole training camp for the Lewis fight, they probably just made him watch Lewis versus Volkov on a loop over and over again. And just in Portuguese at the bottom, you cannot give this guy even 5 seconds.
Yeah. Or even that, that's a good point. Yeah. You're going against the hardest hitter in the history of the UFC, the guy with the most knockouts, but also besides like him catching you, he has that low, then he just explodes up. And if you try to rush something, he can get out. So I think that's a good point. Yeah. Why fight with fire? That was the easiest route to victory. Romanov, southpaw, his striking has come along, but I think it has something to do with how low it used to be. That it's not a strength of his. He still only wants to use it to close the distance to get to the clinch where he can grind. He goes straight titty to titty. Like he's a titty guy. He likes those upper body locks. You've talked about it. He'll go like bear hugs and lateral drops, which is super fun, but also like a lateral drop is dangerous, especially against a guy like Almeida. If you go lateral drop and you end up on bottom, he will shoot some entries. He's very physically strong. I mean, I go back to like when he suplexed Chase Sermon. Good top control. Work to get a better advantage. Good ground and pound. It's more just because he's a heavyweight. He has a legit submission threat. 9 submission wins, but it's like you said, it's like heavyweight submissions. He's not
fat kid on the playground.
Yeah, like I don't expect him to do it like hitting like in a scramble, hitting like a belly down submission, arm bar or like triangle, inverted triangle in a scramble. If he can't get to the fight to the ground, I mean, his gas tank absolutely fails him. He gassed out against Marcin Tybura. I mean, he came, and then it's more about his motivation. I mean, his fight against Alexander Volkov, coming off his first loss, faces Alexander Volkov, and he comes in looking fat, sloppy, and to his credit, his cardio looked better against Ivanov, but I think it has a lot to be said where he's in control of the fight. He's not reacting. He's controlling where a fight goes.
I wish I'd come up with Blagoy ankle weights Ivanov earlier in his career, because now he's already over in PFL losing to people. So
there you go. The guy got stabbed in the friggin' heart, but still losing to Romanov. Romanov's a good wrestler. He's a good grappler. I can't trust him. I expect Almeida to take him down. I think Almeida's taken down better wrestlers already. I expect Almeida to backpack him, control him, and then eventually find a sub. I'll say he does in the second round. Give me Almeida by second round submission.
You make a good point there, because even if Romanov comes in great shape and his wrestling works as well as it ever has, he's not going to wrap up a slow motion key lock from top position on Jailton Almeida in the first round. So even if he wins the first round, he's toast.
Yeah,
because he's got to go. That's why I say
I think his only avenue of victory is, like you said, like get to the clinch, maybe get a takedown, maybe do it again where most of the second round is a clinch and Almeida's kind of pressed against the cage and he can't really react. I don't expect that to happen. I think Almeida's gonna take him down.
Or just get the greatest like Air Moldova takedown of his career and actually like knock out Almeida by slamming him.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's good. That'd be fun.
But that's all low percentage stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I expect that. I think Almeida's gonna take him down immediately. 30 seconds in, he's gonna have him take it down. Very similar to like Curtis Blades.
Third from the top at UFC 302 is a middleweight matchup between Kevin Holland and Michal Oleksiejczuk. Holland, the 31-year-old American, is 25-11 with 1 no contest overall. He's 12-7 with 1 no contest since joining the UFC out of season 2 of Dana White's Contender Series. It is worth noting that he has bounced back and forth between middleweight and welterweight pretty much at his whim. It's not even a case of a Robert Whittaker where there's 2 different phases to the career, or Sean Strickland. Holland seems to just bounce back and forth from one fight to the next based on what fights he's offered and what he feels like, which is very much in keeping with his free-spirited personality. This fight is at middleweight. He is 8-5 with 1 no contest at middleweight. He's already fought once this year. He fought at UFC 299 back in March, where he failed to spoil the UFC debut of Michael Venom Page, but neither did Page really get to uncork something for his highlight reel. So that has Holland on a 2-fight losing streak, however, including his loss last September to Jack Della Maddalena. So here he's moving back up to 185. He's taking on Oleksiejczuk. 29-year-old Pole is 19-7 with 1 no contest overall. He is 7-5 with 1 no contest in the UFC. And opposite of Holland, Oleksiejczuk debuted in the UFC as a visibly undersized light heavyweight and is 3-2 since moving down to middleweight. He is coming in off of a loss. He fought at the same UFC 209 card as Holland did. He made it all of 61 seconds before getting throttled by Michel Pereira. So Oleksiejczuk, for the second time in a row, going against a converted welterweight, hoping it goes better for him this time. The odds makers say probably not, as Holland is minus 250, Oleksiejczuk plus 200. Keith, you kind of mentioned this one, singled this one out during the intro as one that, sounds like fun, but it's not a matchup I ever thought of or would have called for. I think that's partly because you never know what division Kevin Holland is going to fight in next. Yeah. But I'm with you. I don't know what the point of it is, but you could say the same about 80% of UFC fights, and still we keep coming back.
I think it was more I was surprised than Holland at this point. He's anybody, anytime, any place guy. So like nothing makes sense. Like or nothing. I should say nothing doesn't make sense because he's just gonna fight anybody. He doesn't care about rankings. He don't care about. So no. I think that's what it is.
He wants to be econo size Donald Cerrone.
Yeah, like it was more of
4 or 5 times a year. He wants the checks. He wants bonuses. He wants to say fly shit on the mic. No, that's a good point. Because if you ask Michal Oleksiejczuk, like, what's your professional goal? Whether it's realistic or not, Oleksiejczuk is going to say, I want to be a champion. When I realized that wasn't going to happen at 205, those guys were just too big. I moved down to 185, but my goal is to win enough fights in a row to win a title. I don't like if Holland's being honest. I think you're absolutely right. That's not his goal right now.
No.
I want to fight a lot. I want to make money.
Yeah.
I want to invite people to my gym who troll me online and ruin their day. So yeah,
I think he realizes like the window of being a professional athlete, a fighter is very small. So make the best out of it. Get as much opportunity. You can't take these long time off like some of these other guys. And I think it's just a matter of like, hey, we need someone who wants to fight on this card, and he's like, I'm always down to fight. And they're like, well, right now we don't have a welterweight available. I'll fight middleweight. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, okay. Oleksiejczuk said he'll fight on this card, and that's how they get matched.
I love that you said this. For those of you watching right now, Keith saying that about Holland, that's him like setting a volleyball into the air. And when we talk about Paulo Costa in about 15 minutes, I'm going to spike that shit. So, but anyway, tell me who you think wins this fight and what it looks like. And since you're hearing these lines for these betting lines for the first time when I'm reading them off to you, what was your initial reaction to Holland being a 2-1 favorite? Are you down with that, or?
I'm very surprised because I like Oleksiejczuk as a fighter. You messed me up when you said spiked because I was still thinking of Niko Price spiking my kids' brownies, but. I'm so sick of Kevin talking about Kevin. Not that I dislike him as a fighter. It's just like
he fights a lot.
Yeah, like we talked about a while ago. Who have we previewed the most? A week ago we were talking about it, and you said Angel Hill. To me, it's got to be Kevin Holland. If I had to put money on.
And it feels like it is because he fought 5 times in 2020, and that's when we started the show.
Yeah, but it's not like he slowed down a bunch of the other years.
No.
So if I had to bet a Hollywood, he'd have to be like the odds on. The only person who could figure that out, Jay Patrick could probably figure that out in about 10 minutes. But yeah. I'm going to guess that it's Holland. He's a good athlete. He's long and lengthy. I've said this about him about 972 times. He covers distance so quickly due to his length. One step and he's halfway across the cage. Accurate striker, pretty fast hands. He likes that up jab. Good power. He's one of the guys who actually, I think he has less power moving up to middleweight. A lot of times I think that adds with you. That's not the case. But he also had this stretch at middleweight. He was matched up against the wrong guys. Not that I don't think he'd be successful at middleweight. He avoids strikes by rolling with punches and pulling his head back, which never looks too good. He also move his head, he'll also back up to the cage and try to avoid it that way. Really good kicking game. He loves to keep distance with those kicks. Good high kick. Good at following his kicks into the pocket where he lands shots. He can do well in the clinch when he's the one offensively on the attack. He knees in there easily. He'll box up your ears. I've said in the past where he'll just like target face, hand. I'm messing up. This is between me and I'll pull back the card again. When I misspeak for a second, we just keep rolling. When Ben misspeaks, Paul is fixed. That's why I was like, man, Ben is slow. Like you always mess it up, and Ben like flawless victory every single time. Flawless.
Nobody says that. All the worthwhile content on the show is coming from you. I'm just here for one-liners and to read off the people's records.
Yeah. I completely lost what we were talking. Where was I? Who knows where I was? Who cares? Guys, you've heard me talk about Kevin Holland before. You know what? I'm moving on. Who cares? Like I had a bunch of notes about Kevin Holland. Fuck it. It's Kevin Holland. We all know it. Oleszejczyk, southpaw, high volume striker. He's a pressure striker. He's really good at forcing his opponents onto their back foot and then not letting them escape when he's there. He tends to fight in bursts and getting with combinations, get in the pocket, throw down. He wings his overhand where he used it to kind of close the distance to get to that pocket. One of the best body strikers in the UFC. He's got underrated power. I think the dude can crack. He's all offensive though. He's one of these guys. He trusts his chin and he walks through shots. The problem is not his chin it fell, but like you can't walk in against a guy like Michel Pereira. He gets smashed to the body. I do think that might say more about Pereira than Oleszejczyk. It's just Pereira's a really good fighter. His offensive wrestling has come along a little bit. He'll actually mix in a takedown or two here and there, but he's not a good defensive wrestler. I think some of it gets overreacted because how easily he was taken down back in the day against Jim Crute, but he still struggles to get off the bottom. He has been subbed a few times in the past. I think the line should be closer, but I'm still picking Holland. I like Oleszejczyk a lot. I really do. I think he's an underrated fighter. But Holland has a big reach advantage. I think he uses his kicks more. He doesn't use it, but he actually is probably the better offensive wrestler and definitely the better in the overall grappling. I think he works outside. He maybe even mix in a takedown too. And you know what? I'm going to say catches the sub. Give me Holland by second round sub.
I like a lot about the breakdown you gave there. And you mentioned that Oleszejczyk is underrated. Yeah, underrated by me, among other people. Like I saw him at 205 and I kind of ignored the things that were impressive because, yeah, he's a good boxer. He works the body. And even as undersized as he looked, and against guys like Ovince St. Preux and Jim Crute and John Vellante, he looked 2 weight classes smaller than those guys. But even against those guys, like he showed good pop. Like he has good power in his hands. He's had mixed results since dropping the middleweight, but I absolutely think it's the right move. Like his power has more than carried over. I mean, good speed and reflexes on the feet. I picked it really dead wrong when he lamped Chidi and Njokuani in their fight. And yeah, he's gotten victimized by Michel Pereira and Caio Borralho, but one, Borralho was able to go straight to Oleszejczyk's biggest weakness, which is his ground game. And Pereira, as you pointed out, he's an elite fighter. If I knew for a fact that we were going to get serious Kevin Holland, who's going to fight to his best advantage, and he's like, okay, the fun ends or at least is at risk if I get 3 losses in a row in the UFC. Like, nobody's cutting Holland after his 3rd straight loss, but at that point, it does start to get a little more nerve-wracking. That's when he's like, well, damn, am I going to end up on the prelims next time? Because the wild card here is, Holland's offensive wrestling in particular is very underrated, and it's underrated in part because it's underused, and then his grappling period is underrated. If he mixes that in, that's a huge advantage to him, and it's an advantage in its own right, where, he can take Oleksiejczuk down and just abuse him on the ground, but also in that it will set up his things on the feet if Oleksiejczuk has that to worry about. So the line initially didn't make sense to me, but if I think, okay, this is as close to having his back against the wall as Kevin Holland has probably been in the UFC, he knows he needs a win here. He uses all the weapons at his disposal. It starts to make more sense. You got Holland by sub. I wouldn't surprise me, but give me this one to make the distance and Holland to win a pretty comfortable decision. That brings us to the co-main event of UFC 302, a middleweight matchup between former champ Sean Strickland and former title challenger Paulo Costa. Strickland, the 33-year-old American, is 28-6 overall. He's 15-6 in the UFC. 15-6, but he, like some other fighters we mentioned, has bounced back and forth between weight classes, though in his case, it was more of a straightforward move. He is 8-3 since moving up from welterweight. And obviously he is the former champ. He became UFC champ last September in a pretty shocking outcome, taking a unanimous decision over Israel Adesanya that he frankly made look kind of easy and routine. His title reign lasted all of 4 months as he dropped a split decision to Dricus du Plessis at UFC 297 in January. This is his first fight back as the former champ, and he is matched up here against Costa. 33-year-old Brazilian is 14-3 overall. He is 6-3 in the UFC. He is a former title challenger. He challenged Israel Adesanya for the title at UFC 253 back in 2020. Came up short definitively, but nonetheless remains a major draw. He fought most recently back in February, dropping a unanimous decision to Robert Whittaker at UFC 298. And he has, in fact, lost 3 of his last 4. The lone bright spot in there being a decision win over Luke Rockhold in a completely irrelevant fight that was much more fun than it needed to be. Odds here, unsurprisingly, favor Strickland. He is minus 230, Costa plus 190. All of the variables would seem to favor Strickland here. Like, the one thing that I would say Costa has over Strickland is one-shot power. Like, Strickland is the kind of guy that wears you down, like kills you by 1,000 cuts. Volume guy, very much a boxer. Whereas Costa is a lower volume guy who kind of waits to explode, throws huge, massive kicks, and then has like huge power in his hands. So one-shot power is the one thing that I think favors Costa. Everything else here would seem to favor Strickland. But both these guys they've been so inconsistent. And obviously Costa has been inconsistent. That's kind of the name of the game for him. But the Strickland who fought Israel Adesanya and the one who fought Dricus du Plessis 4 months later, they just seem so different that it's tough to reconcile them with them being the same guy. Like, Adesanya just looked so inert against Strickland, was just so kind of frustrated and stymied by nothing but a 1-2. Like, Strickland just walked forward, kept throwing his jab and his cross, and completely confounded one of the most dazzling strikers in the history of the sport for 5 rounds. That same guy came out and looked weirdly inert against du Plessis 4 months later. Maybe it's something where the UFC middleweight belt is covered with fentanyl. I don't know, but I like either Strickland against Costa here. what I was going to say about Costa is, like, he's the opposite of Holland. Like, it seems kind of obvious that Kevin Holland's priority now is, I'm going to fight back and forth at 170 or 185. I'm going to take fights that sound fun. I'm going to be up for coming in on short notice. I want to win. I'm definitely want to win enough to stay in the UFC and stay on main cards and remain a guy that can headline fight nights. So I want to win enough to do that, but I also want to win bonuses. I, want to keep my personality out there, keep my sponsorship dollars flowing, things like that. Costa is proof that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. He got to the UFC in 2017. He fought 3 times in 2017. They were all knockouts. And he's literally fought once a year since then. I can't think of another fighter who never won a title who is held on in our consciousness for that long, fighting that seldom. And I mean, part of it is that for a while there, he was a very good fighter and he beat some good fighters. But when you look back at it now, him getting to the title shot he did against Israel Adesanya, it was partly, in large part, because Adesanya at that point was already really starting to exhaust the pool of available contenders. Because when you realize that he got to a title shot in the UFC, off of wins over Oluwale Bongboje, the post-USADA ghost of Johnny Hendricks, and then, legit wins over Uriah Hall and Yoel Romero, that's like thin paper to like pay your way to a title shot in any UFC division. And since then, he's kind of reverted to the mean. He's fought once a year at best, and he's 1-3 in his last 4. Like, he still has dangerous tools. He was competitive against Robert Whittaker. I thought Whittaker was going to embarrass him. I thought unfocused Costa, now being managed by his girlfriend, who knows what kind of shape he's going to show up in. He's been out of the sport for a year and a half. I thought there was a decent chance that Whittaker would embarrass him, but he was pretty competitive. But then at the same time, he fought Luke Rockhold, a guy that rocks himself shaving in the morning, threw the kitchen sink at him for 3 rounds. And he won the decision, but there was a time when like Costa would have knocked out Rockhold, closing the cage door behind him. I don't know what Costa has left.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Did he somehow look better in a loss against Rob Whittaker than he did in a win against Luke Rockhold?
100%. And we were, and you and I think we're both.
I thought he clearly lost to Whittaker, but I'm just saying,
but he was competitive. He looked like he belonged in the same division with him.
Yeah.
Whereas that was Rockhold coming back from a million years away, chin shot. The reasonable guess was that, okay, Costa's going to knock out Rockhold with the first solid punch he lands. Like, if Costa could land 40 headshots on Luke Rockhold and not knock him out, I don't think Strickland maybe needs to be quite as scared of the power as I alluded to off the beginning here. All this is just my long way around to saying I think this is a good bounce back fight for Strickland. Costa, I kind of mentioned that he has name value and drawing value that is really out of proportion with what he's actually accomplished within the last 5 years in the sport. We're coming up on 5 years since he took a close decision over Yoel Romero to earn that title shot against Adesanya. He stayed in the public eye since then, mostly by having a really bizarre personality and by who he used to be and by hilarious failures. He managed to make Adesanya mad enough that Adesanya is still got Costa's name in his mouth, even though he put it to rest definitively in the cage. That you're living rent free in someone's head if they beat you as bad as Adesanya beat Costa and Adesanya's still talking about you. And then, the hilarious Marvin Vettori fight where he just kind of showed up talked the fight up an entire weight class during fight week, fought a terrible fight, lost, and then claimed he had a wine hangover. Like, you can't write this stuff.
And how badass was Vettori? He's like, all right, we'll fight at 205.
Yeah, I was surprised because Marvin Vettori is the angriest man in Italy. I'm surprised that he took that like as well as he did. Living in LA has maybe mellowed him out a little bit. But again,
hanging out with Niko Price.
Long way around to say, at best, I think this looks like the Whittaker fight for Costa, where he's competitive round by round, but there's no question who's winning the rounds. Even at his best, Costa wasn't a super high volume guy. His kicks were always his best weapons, in my opinion, and that's kind of trailed off a little bit in recent years. So I expect Costa to just get out volumed by Strickland I don't even think it'll be that exciting a fight. I think this is just Strickland gets back on track with as big a name as probably exists in the division right now that poses this little of a threat to him. Give me Strickland by a pretty dominant unanimous decision.
What was the betting line on that again?
Strickland minus 230, Costa plus 190.
Yeah, that's about what I expected. Dude, I'm not really interested in this fight. The whole like Strickland gimmick thing, I'm over it. I mean, it's not like a political statement. Like, I know he's like a right winger, so am I. So before someone who like comes at me, that's not why. He just comes off like a douche. I don't know.
Hey, sometimes people that I agree with politically embarrass me. Like,
yeah, we're voting for the same guy, but
yes, like
that guy embarrassed me.
But like, yeah, like it's like we're not all like that guy. Like,
exactly. Yeah. And Costa, like his whole like goofy thing, like I don't know. Strickland, I get into this skill. Strickland, he's a striker. He just marches down his foes, very relaxed. The issue is sometimes he can be too relaxed. I mean, he can cruise because he has a little bit of that I'm not getting hurt, I'm not giving away rounds look. Look what happened in the Drake du Plessis fight. He didn't pick up the volume when du Plessis was, and du Plessis was landing harder shots, and that won him the fight in a very close fight. Strickland's a technically sound striker. He can start off a little slow and pick it up a little bit as the fight goes on. Though he didn't do that against du Plessis, and he was a fast starter against Adesanya. Like his entire, tools, like 95% of them is a jab. Like he works behind one of the best jabs in MMA, arguably the best jab in MMA. He will fall with some straight shots. Almost does not throw power shots. Doesn't throw a lot of hooks or anything. He does keep everything tight. Doesn't really overextend on his shots. Not many tells. He's gone on record himself admitting that he doesn't have power, admitting that he's a point fighter. Though he did drop Israel Adesanya, but I really think that was like an anomaly. Like that's not the norm. And Adesanya looked terrible in the fight. He just seemed like such a funk. He has good kicks to the body, good kicks to the legs, but he didn't kick du Plessis much at all, especially later as the fight went on. He's open to leg kicks himself. He's not bad when he closes this. He can battle in the clinch, though he doesn't wrestle much. But going against Uriah Hall, he did wrestle took him out 4 times. So it is there. He's got a pretty strong sprawl and roll takedown defense, and he doesn't get tired because he's like I said, he's like a car that just slightly goes over the speed limit. I might disagree a little bit on Costa on his aggression. I think he's pretty aggressive. I think his output, I should say. He's the boxer. He marches forward. He does well to cut off the cage when his opponent is trapped. He'll unload like a big combination. So I think his volume is like more in spurts, I should say, than like his cumulative numbers probably look okay, but it's like in like everything's in little sections, He wants to be the one marching forward, and that's when Robert Whittaker was able to turn around because Costa looked good in the first round, and then Whittaker was able to kind of force Costa back, fighting off his back foot, and that's when Whittaker did much better. Like Whittaker started bullying him back, and forced him on his back foot. Costa doesn't seem to respect people's power. He almost fights fails. I always go back to that Euro Romero. The Euro Romero fight to me was the most impressive one, even though it was like a very close fight. But at that time, who he beat and how he beat him, he was one of these guys willing to eat a shot to land a shot. And he showed against Robert Whittaker he still has a great chin. Now, sure, someone could come at me and be like, dude, what about Izzy knocked him out? Yeah, we're talking about arguably the greatest striker in MMA history, or one of them. He had Anderson Silva, Krokop, whoever you want to say is, but he's in the category. Costa throws hard. He looks like he should have massive power, and I think he does. But the Rockhold one is that one that makes you shake your head. I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I remember when we previewed that fight, I expected Costa to make freaking Rockhold look like a freaking vegetable, like just, taking like a freaking potato and start smashing with a hammer on the, on the table or something, and then he didn't put him out. He didn't, drop him and all this. So
it turned into Griffin Bonner 1, just this sloppy fun slugfest that made it to the final horn because neither guy was a huge hitter.
Yeah, I agree. Now, he does have a very good left hook. He throws it downstairs and upstairs, which I like. You hit the left hook to the body, hit the left hook up top. I like that you pointed out that the best part of his game is his kicks. He's got thudding leg kicks. I mean, look at those big legs of him. He's got a very quick high kick. He hit Robert Whittaker with a beautiful spinning wheel kick that would have knocked out so many other people. Because he's so heavy on the front foot, he is open to calf kicks himself. He hardly ever wrestles, though he did get a takedown against Marvin Vettori. He is hard to take down. He's got a big base. He faces some decent wrestlers back in the day, Johnny Hendricks and Euro Romero. Neither guy really looked to wrestle him too much, but just, he showed better cardio against Robert Whittaker than he normally gets credit with. When you look at him, he looks like he's tired. But one of these guys, I think he slows down, but he doesn't completely gas. And he seems to have, after his last two fights, I figured out his weight cut issue where, he's making weight, and it's not that weird thing that happened with Vettori. So that should help his cardio a little bit. For top guys in the division, I'm not that high on either. And again, this is like when you have someone like Olasechek who's in the same division, and I say, I'm high on him, and then I'm like, I'm not that high on Strickland. It's like for that category. You know what I mean? Obviously, I think Strickland would be Olasechek. It's just how we think of people.
Would Costa beat Olasechek on Saturday?
I don't know.
Without watching tape, I'm probably taking Olasechek in that one.
Yeah. I would take Holland over Costa. For sure. I'd take Holland over Costa for sure.
Yeah.
Olasechek? I might. I might. If Costa beats Strickland, I think I'm giving Costa a better chance than you are. Just because I agree that his power is overrated, but he still hits harder than Strickland. Mm-hmm. And I know, again, one guy got knocked out by Izzy, one guy almost knocked out Izzy. If you had to ask anybody who would rather get punched in the face, clean in the face by Sean Strickland or Paulo Costa, give me Sean Strickland all day.
Good grief. Yeah.
Yeah. So he still had he's more exposed. I could see where Strickland cruises, and because Costa lands the bigger shots, he gets the same thing that happened against Duplessis. So I think I give Costa a better chance than you do. And I'm hedging my bets. If he wins, I can say, see, I told you. But I think it was smart for Strickland to make it a 5-round fight. I think having 2 more rounds does favor Strickland. I don't think it favors Strickland as much as some will believe it does, but I still think it helps him. Mm-hmm. I expect him just to be cleaner. I think he jabs up. I think it's close, though. I don't think it's good. I think it could be cost a little early and Strickland pulling ahead later, stop forcing his way back behind that jab. Sometime maybe Strickland comes out more aggressive. If you could guarantee me Strickland comes out more aggressive and doesn't cruise, and he kind of has that like epiphany how he lost the title is I fought this way. I shouldn't fight this way anymore. I got to be more aggressive. Then I would like Strickland a lot more. Give me I'll say Strickland unanimous decision.
With that, we come to the main event of UFC 302, a lightweight title fight between your champ, Islam Makhachev, and challenger, Dustin Poirier. Makhachev, the 32-year-old Dagestani, is 25-1 overall. He's 14-1 in the UFC and on a 13-fight win streak overall. He became champ back in October of 2022, tapping out Charles Oliveira in the second round at UFC 280. Since then, he has had 2 title defenses. They comprise both of his fights of 2023. Both were against featherweight champ Alexander Volkanovski. The first one at UFC 284 was one of the greatest UFC title fights ever, a nip-tuck affair where he won by unanimous decision. The second one in October, UFC 294, Volkanovski came in on short notice. It turned out not to be a great not to be a great decision, as Makhachev knocked him out in the first round. Makhachev will look for his third title defense here, moving him into some truly rarefied territory. And in order to do so, he will need to get past Poirier. 35-year-old Louisiana native is 30-8 with 1 no contest overall. He is 22-7 with 1 no contest since joining the UFC out of the acquisition of World Extreme Cage Fighting. He started his UFC run as a ridiculously oversized featherweight. Since moving up to lightweight, he is 14-4 with 1 no contest. And he is a former UFC interim champ, former 2-time title challenger. He is coming in off of a win. He fought at UFC 299 back in March, knocking out the red-hot up-and-comer Benoit Saint-Denis in the second round. He'll look to make the most of this, his third shot at an undisputed UFC title. Needless to say, the odds are not in his favor. Keith, you already know that Makhachev is more than a 2-1 favorite.
Okay.
Guess what the line is on Makhachev as of the favorite. Just even guess like what the first digit is. Like, is it the 300, 400, 500? Yeah.
Negative 400.
You only wish. If you see Makhachev at minus 400 out there, hammer that shit or bake it into your parlay, because what I'm seeing is Makhachev minus 575, Poirier plus 425 on the comeback.
That might hit 600.
Yeah, there's a little wiggle room there, but Makhachev minus 575 is about as good as it gets. Like it is a wide line.
So you mean like other, like, depending on which site you use or which casino you go to, he could be negative.
Oh, he's worse than negative 600 at some already. He's close to negative 700 at some of them. Like when I call off these odds, just for those wondering at home, I am looking at fightodds.io. That's my go-to site. And I basically just take the best reasonable line, like the best line that's available through a book that's available to North American fans. Because if you're watching this, you probably don't care what you can get on some site in Malta that you would need to use a VPN to get. Like, you want to know what it is on FanDuel or, so that's what I'm calling out here.
What was it? Right. What was the name of that site? Fight what?
Fightodds.io.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know like Best Fight Odds. I used to go.
I used Best Fight Odds until about 3 years ago. I like fightodds.io. They seem to get the lines up earlier. Okay. Like Best Fight Odds is still better as an archive of what the odds were for a fight that took place in the past. But for these previews, I go fightodds.io. Okay.
I just checked it out right now. Just because that's cool.
There are some wide lines.
Yeah, like, so people, like, if this is your first time watching, I purposely do not check the odds because I don't want to be influenced by them. If I'm on the fence on one fight and I go, oh man, Vegas has this guy negative 200, like, is there something I'm not seeing? Then I go that way. And I'm not a gambler anyways. Yeah.
All right. I kind of called this. I'm in preparing for, to preview this card. I looked back at my notes from UFC 299 back in March when Poirier fought Saint-Denis. And basically, I take my notes for the recap just on the same document where I compose my notes for the preview. So I have what things I made notes to myself before the fight than things that I observed during. And obviously, when you reach out to me during the card, you know, you're always, okay, let's do matchups for this fighter, this fighter, this fighter. So I made notes for Poirier, and here we go. So he beat Benoit Saint-Denis. It was a fantastic come from behind win because he was losing that fight pretty handily until he won.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. People forgot that.
Saint-Denis took him down over and over again, aided by Poirier jumping guillotines 3 times.
Poirier won 10 seconds of that fight.
My note on Poirier's next matchup is there are 4 lightweight fights at UFC 300, and of the people that could conceivably challenge for the lightweight title if they win, Poirier's fought most of them already. Holloway, Gaethje, Oliveira, it's either Poirier or Arman Tsarukyan next. And sure enough, Tsarukyan didn't want it. Poirier backs into this title shot. Like, I'm not saying I agreed with it, but I'm just like, okay, what's next for Poirier is probably a title shot.
I think not to get sidetracked, I think the UFC, and I know they're doing to Poirier, that's likely they probably do a Holloway to Poirier fight, but the way UFC 300 ended, the biggest fight card of the year, or one of the biggest ones, you know, seems like one of the biggest ever, the biggest this year for sure.
Oh yeah.
But the moment was Holloway. All that stuff that happened, the moment was Holloway. I think Holloway should have jumped the line. And you know me, I give people a little passes, a little more. You're more like the, you know, win 4, win 5, the division. I'm like, sometimes you just make exceptions. The peak of his popularity at that point, now I don't know if he could take the fight, but if you could have got him in like International Fight Week against Makhachev, that would have been massive.
Honestly, I would have been fine with that. Like, just as a fan, like, what fight do I want to see?
Max Holloway.
After that, it's Max Holloway. I don't know if he could
Max Holloway fight anybody. Yeah. Right? Like, listen, if listen, you know, I know that the big thing going on right now with John Jones, just get off Twitter because you're not making yourself look better. And you know, I'm like a John Jones truther. You know that is like no one defends that guy more than I'm like his freaking attorney. How much I defend that guy, but like. You know, I won't say no. I defend.
Being John Jones' attorney sounds like the worst job in the world. Like, please go.
Hey, you're busy. You know, the whole like Tom Aspinall thing. I would never ever call John Jones scared. Like that's just freaking John Jones. I guess for everybody, but it does feel a little Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell kind of feeling. You know, the last time I remember some guy like really finding every excuse not to fight somebody. But anyways, I'm getting to my point. If John Jones like tweeted out and said, you know what, I'm not fighting Aspinall. I want the baddest motherfucker, and said he want to fight Max Holloway, I'm still interested in watching. Like, I'll watch Max Holloway fight anybody. I love that dude.
Yeah, and if you don't,
and he'd probably take it.
Oh yeah.
And then he'd say some badass line why he did take it, like, "Oh yeah, Gladiators didn't walk around with scales or some shit." Oh, how can I not be the baddest motherfucker if I don't fight the greatest of all time? Or, you know, some shit.
Who outweighs me by 100 pounds, literally 100 pounds.
All joke aside, if somehow the UFC offered a heavyweight title fight to Max Holloway, what's the percentage of him saying no?
0.
Yeah, 2%. Like, you know, he'd fight Francis Ngannou. He would. Well,
and the funny thing is, if he fought John Jones, they'd have to put it in Toronto, since the UFC used to just love to stick both those guys in Toronto all the time. Like,
shout out to the people who went to the timestamp and just went right to the main event and got a side of Max Holloway talk. And John Jones, we're fantasy matchmaking right now between a featherweight and a heavyweight. Hey, let me ask you real quick. We talked about the betting lines, and I'm going to let you get to excited. So he's Makachev's negative 575. You said.
Yep.
And Tsarukyan got the fight. What do you think his line would be right now?
I still think Makhachev is a comfortable favorite, but I think it's like minus 250.
Yeah, I wrote down negative 300. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
How about Holloway?
Minus 300, minus 400.
Yeah, I agree.
And here, for what it's worth, and I'm on record now as saying I am fine with Poirier having this title shot, not like the UFC or Poirier need my stamp of approval, but
it's Poirier.
It's just a Poirier.
Yeah.
And being on record as saying I would love to have seen Holloway take on Makhachev. Poirier has a better chance against Makhachev than Holloway does, because if Poirier wins this fight,
I'm gonna disagree with that.
All right, here. Well,
wait, Holloway. I think Holloway would have a better chance of beating Makhachev. Is that what you're saying? You're saying Poirier would have a better chance of beating Makhachev.
I think Poirier has a better chance of beating Makhachev than Holloway, and here's why. Well, and you know what? My actual breakdown.
Are you saying Poirier has a better shot of beating Makhachev than Poirier has of beating Holloway?
No. Then Holloway does of beating Makhachev.
Oh no, I respectfully disagree with you on that one.
Okay, well,
okay,
you know what? Well, and my actual analysis of this fight is going to be pretty quick. So I'll just say, if Poirier wins this fight, I see it happening one of two ways. Either
I'm glad, because I have the same notes.
The ridiculous guillotine works for the first time.
Dude, we have the same notes. We have the same exact notes.
Or it looks like the Santini fight, where he is just getting thoroughly out.
Did you hack my computer? Because that's like the same exact notes I had.
Yeah. Or he plunks Makhachev with just because whatever else, like Poirier's had the same. He's had the same liabilities since he was a featherweight in the WEC, but he's also always had the same strengths. He is one of the hardest hitters in the division, and he's got a lot of power in everything. Like, he's got power in both hands. His kicks are really hard. So it's one of those two things. And because we saw what it looked like when Poirier took on Khabib Nurmagomedov, who he and Makhachev are not twins. They're like, it's easy to say just because they both got the Dagestani foreguard all around and they're basically master and protege. They've been at the same camps forever. It's easy to think of one as the carbon copy of the other, but Makhachev and Nurmagomedov are not the same. They have different bodies. They have slightly different skill sets. Like, Makhachev is already a better striker than Khabib Nurmagomedov ever was. But in turn, Makhachev is one of the best wrestlers in the sport, one of the most airtight top position grapplers in the sport, but not quite as good a wrestler and not quite as airtight on top as Khabib. So we're talking about incremental differences.
But it's still like steak and lobster. Like,
very much. Like, I'm not trying to denigrate either guy.
No.
Two of the greatest lightweights of all time, but
I know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying Poirier can't do it, because you know what? I picked him to lose to Benoit Santini. I was happy to be wrong, but hey, I also picked him to beat Justin Gaethje in the fight before that. So I guess what I'm really saying is I'm not good at picking Dustin Poirier fights. But even though he has two clear routes to victory over Makhachev, he is gonna get at least 20 to 30 seconds each round for as long as the fight goes to try to punch Makhachev in the head as hard as he can. And every time Makhachev shoots a takedown from the outside, Poirier is going to get a chance to try and guillotine him. Still, knowing that that's what he has, I mean, that's like trying to throw a dart through the window of a moving train. Like, these are low percentage things given what we've seen of Islam Makhachev.
Like, not one of those like slow, like one that's like carrying coal. That's like the Exceller. I expect that Makhachev is going to take Poirier down. He's going to take him down early and often, regardless of whether Poirier does the right thing. Like, what if Poirier sprawls beautifully, gets underhooks, tries to stand Makhachev back up? I still think he goes down. It'll be easier if he jumps the guillotine. He gets dumped instead of blasted through.
Yeah. And Makhachev goes to work on top. He's just suffocating is the perfect word. And if you ask Poirier, I bet he'd agree, because you never forget him between rounds saying to, I'm assuming it was Mike Brown in the corner, I can't get him off me. About during the Nurmagomedov fight, like at the end of the second round, Poirier's like, I can't get him off me. I like, we know what it's going to look like. And Dustin Poirier is one of the biggest badasses in the history of the sport. So when I say Makhachev will end up breaking him, it's, again, I'm not saying anybody is scared. I'm just saying that Poirier will reach a point in the fight where he's like, I know exactly what he's going to do, and I can't stop it. And I'm not used to that happening to me, and it sucks, and I'm out of ideas.
Yeah.
And that's when we probably get either the just kind of ground and pound mercy stoppage or the ground and pound, turn your back, grab the choke. I'm going to say it's the submission. I'm going to say that this being Dustin Poirier, this is going to make it to the 4th round. And he's going to have a moment. He's going to have a moment where the guillotine looks tight. And we all know, 95% certain the Makhachev's head is going to pop out, but he is kind of straining, and Poirier wrapped up his guard. And we'll probably have at least one moment where Poirier puts him on skates for a second.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be exciting, but like it's always going to be a bad matchup for Dustin Poirier. Give me Makhachev by 4th round submission.
Yeah, like us, like trashing Poirier's chances is not trashing Poirier the fighter, and definitely not the person. Like, no, you can't be a fight fan and dislike Dustin Poirier. There's certain guys in a category.
That's what he and Holloway have in common. Like, they are the two guys.
Holloway, Gaethje too.
Yeah, Gaethje. Like, just with Poirier and Holloway, it even goes a step. Like with Poirier and Holloway, it goes even a step further, because anytime there's a UFC embedded, they're building houses for flood victims or hurricane victims in their hometown, like handing out bottled water to. They're like top shelf citizens on top of being great fighters.
If Tim Tebow could freaking knock dudes out, like, that's Dustin Poirier. Like,
that's
or if Tim Tebow was Hawaiian, and didn't look like a fighter, then it'd be Max Holloway. The problem is, man, let me ask you this question, and this is more of a recap question, but I think that was good. I think I was it's late. I'm like, oh man, I got to be at a softball field in a couple hours, and then I get this new life, and I'm like, hey, let's go even deeper in this fight. So when you go through the divisions, who's the greatest guy in each weight class? It's lightweight's the only one that's like, there might be a little bit of argument, but I think most people give it to Khabib at this point, right?
I think so, but it's a lot closer than people think.
Yeah, but you would too, right? It's just because he retired.
Yeah.
It's because he retired so long.
It's because he retired undefeated, but But also he retired like without defending. He could have defended 3-4 more times. Yeah. He easily could have, and he could have put this thing on lock. Yeah. If he defended the lightweight title like 8 times in a row or something against the kind of people he would have been taking on,
he could still be the champ right now. Who knows?
Yeah, dude, it could be him, and I mean, it wouldn't be Poirier again, but it'd be like him fighting Sarukian or somebody this weekend. Like,
who's the second best light heavyweight? I should be lightweight heavyweight.
Charles Oliveira.
Oh, Charles Oliveira. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I was thinking like more of a champion run, but because Oliveira wasn't champion that long, but that's a good one actually. I thought you would. The whole reason I was saying, I thought you would say BJ, because a lot of people say BJ, and I was going to argue Oliveira, Volkanovski, and Poirier. That run is better than anything. I'll say that run right there, title fights, is better than anybody else's run ever. Other than it might actually probably better than Khabib's too.
It might be. I think there's a solid, there's a solid argument to be had there. It's absolutely unbelievable. And dude, I came up in the era where I was never the irrational BJ Penn fan, but I understood why the guys were, because at his best, it seemed like he could do anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm not talking about the totality of their career. No. I'm just talking about their title run. But I don't know.
When you're hanging your title run on wins over Joe Stevenson, it's a whole different sport.
Exactly. That's my point. Yeah. So we'll get more into that to the recap show, I'm sure. But Makhachev, he's so freaking good, dude. He's a southpaw that's such a good athlete. He moves well, quick hands, technically sound, accurate. He's one thing I've said about him in the past. He's constantly winning the outside leg battle to set up his power shots. He gets in the pocket and he's really good there because he can land big shots or he can go to his wrestling. He sets up his shots well with feints. He blasted Charles Oliveira with a beautiful right hook. His fade back left hand is super good. Good kicks. He lands kicks to all areas of the body. I mean, look at the high kick he just landed on Alex Volkanovski. I know he took that on like wicked short notice, and Volkanovski's not that tall, and but just one of the cleanest kicks you'll see. He gets inside. He's so good. He can grind away in positions. I mean, he was at his best against Volkanovski in their fight, just pressing Volkanovski and just wearing him down and winning. Not the most exciting, but just controlling Volkanovski there. One of the best dirty boxers in UFC history. He's such a good wrestler. He can get upper body takedowns. He can get entries. He isn't. I agree. He isn't as good of a wrestler as Khabib was in the explosive, but he will. He doesn't explode through your hips, but he's just so good at like getting a single, then transition to a double, chain it into something else, working an angle. He's so good at that, like just chain wrestling. He's good at just creating a scramble and winning it, and winning the inch battle like he was doing against Volkanovski, where it was like the difference was he's behind. He's got that little angle on the hip that you weren't ready for. He uses his long arms just to get a limb and you go flying. His takedown defense is just rock solid. Great control. I mean, Volkanovski got up, and it took everything in him to get up. It wasn't just like, Volkanovski get up and he'd break free, but it was so grueling to get up to that. Like, people thought Volkanovski won by getting up, and I was like, no. Makhachev won that because he just made Volkanovski use everything to get up, and then he returned him a couple times on top of that. Good when he gets you on pinning against, shoulders on the mat, smothering top controls, just squeezes the life out of you. Good ground and pound. I mean, look what he did to Bobby Green. He battered Bobby Green. You know how good Bobby Green is. He just battered him. Slick guy. Did you want to say something? Oh, sorry. I thought you said something. I'm sorry. Slick grappler, good back takes. He's a legit submission threat. I mean, he subbed Dan Hooker, made Thiago Moises look like a white belt. He submitted Charles Oliveira, the most submissions in UFC history. Poirier, he's a big dude. I've said it a million times about him. He's a big dude. He's a southpaw. Good output. He loves to switch stance in the mid attack from different angles, which I love. He's a super clean boxer, technically sound. My concern is, and what I saw in his last fight against Benoit Saint-Denis, his hand speed is really dropping. He looks slow against Saint-Denis. Good thing for him, he keeps his base on him when he's striking, so he generates so much power. I mean, we just saw that against Saint-Denis. Like, he still can blast you. We've seen those pictures where after you fight Dustin Poirier, the face pictures, when they see what they're just everybody's face is butchered when you face Dustin Poirier. His counter right is his best strike. I mean, he was landing against Max Holloway, against Conor McGregor. He ruined Eddie Alvarez with body shots. He smashed. He had kicks into his game where he was smashing Conor McGregor's legs with calf kicks. Though he doesn't check leg kicks himself, Dan Hooker had some success against him with the leg kicks. He's definitely not much of an offensive wrestler. If he gets a takedown, it's usually in the clinch or against the fence. He did wrestle McGregor, though, but that was more of a strategy than having a great skill set in that. He's been taken down a lot. He's not a good defensive wrestler. And you mentioned it, like, he makes it worse by jumping guillotine. But, I mean, Khabib took him down. Eddie Alvarez, Dan Hooker, Michael Chandler. The whole jumping for the guillotine, it's not worse that he's gone for it, but the worst that he just refuses to stop. Because, like, even when it was addressed to him against, probably the worst case against Saint Denis, is he's like, yeah, I'm gonna keep trying. Like, he's talked about, like, Michael Brown telling him not to do it. He's like, no, I'm gonna keep doing it. His best attribute is obviously his heart. Like, he's got late stoppages against guys like Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, in absolute wars. He needed last round wins, and I've said this before him, against Dan Hooker, against Max Holloway, against Michael Chandler, where it's like even going into the last round, he found a way to win. I remember when I interviewed him after the Michael Chandler fight, and I mentioned that to him, and I said this last time when I previewed him, but I want to say it again. It's one of the coolest things. It was just so subtle when I asked him, like, what do you have in you that you could somehow win in the fifth round against these legendary guys, like it's like a Max Holloway, and he goes, that's just fighting, man. It's just digging deep. It's part of fighting, and it was just like. It was such a deep answer while also being so simple. And I love that about Dustin Poirier. I'm a huge Dustin Poirier fan. I mean, how can you not? But my concern for him is the wars have taken a toll. I mean, he has found ways to recover in the past, but after that Gaethje KO, the times he was getting hurt by St. Denis, you got to wonder where it ends. Plus him talking about retirement, which is never good. It's side talk, step aside. Someone asked, I know he's been asked, so it's like different than him just throwing it out there, but just sidestep that. Like, oh man, I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about the best guy in the world. I'm thinking about winning the title. That's what I'm thinking about. Like I'd rather try that answer than saying, yeah, this could be the end. And another thing concerning, he got a knockout against Benoit St. Denis. He was breathing pretty hard. And I guess, that was a very high-paced fight. But cardio is never an issue of Poirier, but some of that could be age. So you said it. You kind of stole my notes, but I was going to say there's really only two chances of Poirier winning. It's landing the perfect shot, or his second chance is probably getting that guillotine. I think the first option is extremely unlikely. Excuse me. And I think the second option is almost impossible. So I can't see him winning a decision. Like, I don't think it's even an option for Poirier. I think Makhachev is better. Like, you kept going with the wrestling, and obviously we know he's a better wrestler. Like, I just think Makhachev is better than him everywhere at this point. I think this is a horrendous stylistic matchup. I don't think he even uses his wrestling. I think he's going to beat him up on the feet, and I think he's going to knock him out. I'm going to say he does in the first round. I'm going to say Makhachev wins by first round knockout.
All right. Well, however this one goes, we will definitely talk on the recap about. I mean, it might be germane, but we'll talk about possible Holloway versus Makhachev. All right.
We might be talking about new champion Dustin Poirier. We got to eat some crow.
Yeah. Well, hey, I would.
Crazy things have happened.
And as I always say, I would be happy to be wrong about this one. Yeah. Not because I have anything against Makhachev, but when you think of how the narrative changed about Michael Bisping based on having won, like, think of how much more it would be for Poirier, because Poirier, one of the most beloved fighters in the history of the sport, where Bisping was kind of a heel for most of his career and only became lovable towards the very end. Yeah. And Bisping was
sorry to interrupt you. It would be Glover Teixeira's moment. How his career was changed by one win.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, Bisping was a longtime top 10 guy in a couple of decent divisions, whereas Poirier's been a longtime top 5 guy in 2 incredible divisions. Like, yeah,
that's a good point too.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it. The Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 302, Makhachev versus Poirier, takes place this Saturday at Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. I've been Ben. He has been Keith. If this is your first time checking out one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it. It's not normally this late at night. We're both feeling a little punchy right now, but please do hit that like. It costs you nothing. It makes us feel good. It pleases our bosses. Subscribe so you catch the future ones. Drop us a comment. Keith and I both man the comment section. We'd love to hear your take on these fights. And join us for the recap. We are live on the Sherdog YouTube page right after the main event. Keith takes the captain's chair. We'll talk about all 12 of these fights in reverse order, from the headliner all the way down to that, frankly, very good curtain jerker, talking about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something. And I say that having missed the recap for the show where we had the first headbutt disqualification in UFC history, and we had a girl try to ask for a timeout after getting punched in the boob. I missed that. Hopefully nothing quite that controversial, but we'll also talk about what's next for some of the notable winners as well as losers. And we'll talk to you, because the live chat is open that whole time. So we're taking your questions, your comments, and your hot takes in real time. We have a growing community of friends that hang out with us after the fights. Some of them level up enough that they end up filling in for me when I'm not here. We'd love for you to be part of it. Until then, thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Happy Memorial Day weekend to those of you who live in the United States. And please do enjoy these fights. To the sea.
while you're